We will call to order this meeting of the City Council successor agency to the redevelopment agency. Would you all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Jeff, do we have any changes to the order of the agenda from staff?
No changes from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Any requested changes from the dais? I actually am going to ask, because I have to, for personal reasons, I have to leave tonight by about 10, and it looks like we are going to be pushing that, I was wondering if my colleagues would mind if we did 10D a little earlier in the rotation.
Whatever works for you, Mr. Mayor, is fine.
Okay, thank you.
That's fine.
Report from closed session. Greg.
No reportable items, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Council communications and announcements. Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been a busy couple of weeks. I was pleased to go to the Youth Center Foundation's 15th anniversary, which was a great little event. Also joined staffing the farmers market last Thursday with the Community Development Department, which was a very nice time. But two things I wanted to talk a little bit in depth upon. The first is we had a library board meeting this morning, and I brought a little bit of show and tell. In your packet is a survey that I thought was very interesting that was recently done about resident thoughts on the library system. And as you'll see, San Mateo County residents have very favorable views of the library. The favorability rating among patrons was 97%, which was outstanding. And I brought, and I only have one copy of this, but I can pass it down, a nice little annual report that just came out today. And one of the things in the report, it highlights the recent renovation of the San Carlos Library, so I thought that was nice. I'll pass that down. A couple of little key stats from San Carlos. In the last fiscal year, there were 207,000 visits to the San Carlos Library and 342,000 items in circulation. So I think our libraries are doing really well, and so it was nice to see the report and just the positive public sentiment about the library system. The other thing I wanted to talk about was we had a kickoff meeting on the Tuesday after Labor Day for a business development event, partnership with the Chamber to highlight restaurants in San Carlos, which was a good event. It was widely attended, including representatives from Town Restaurant, Piacere, Noelani's, Cuisinette, Sneakers, many others. Staff was there, the Chamber was there. And the direction that we're heading in, the sentiment of the group was to move to an event where we might shut down the first couple blocks of Laurel and have a long communal table for residents and people from outside the area, and that it might be a single ticket price with all the restaurants on Laurel Street and the surrounding areas combining to provide dinner for the evening and showcase San Carlos restaurants. And I just want to show a couple pictures of some of the example events that we were looking at. So this is an example recently from Nevada City called the Farm to Table Banquet. Here's another, if you want to just keep going, Crystal. So this is another shot of the same event. There's one in Park City, Utah that's been going on for several years that serves 2,500 people. Another example. You can flip through these pretty quickly. So this is Pennsylvania, Phoenix, Arizona, a similar event in Sacramento, and one in Coral Gables, Florida. So I just want to give my colleagues a view of kind of what was talked about in this sort of model, and I hope you can kind of picture what we could do with Laurel Street. And I think the next steps are that there's going to be a planning committee put together made up of restaurant owners, and the target is for something the summer of 2015, and I'm sure as we get closer, we'll get an update from staff. And that's what I got.
Okay.
Yeah, Matt?
Cameron?
I have a question for Cameron, if I may. On your first item regarding, you're now on the library JPA.
I am, yeah.
So when I was on the library JPA, there was some discussion at the time regarding one of the only cities that does not have a new library, and that's Half Moon Bay. And I'm wondering if there was any discussion of that, what the plans are to build them a new library. And the other comment I would have regarding that is if there's any action we can take, Mr. Mayor, to make a recommendation to our representative to support Half Moon Bay in their efforts to get a new library.
So there was no discussion about Half Moon Bay at today's meeting. We have discussed it in the past, and I know there's an effort underway to bring a library to Half Moon Bay, which I'm supportive of, and I can definitely follow up and see what the latest is.
Okay.
All right, Matt?
So I just have a couple items. One, I did attend a BPAC meeting, and just a note to staff, there was some discussion at that meeting about the need for a city to have a BPAC to either participate in the grant funding process or to go ahead and participate in the grant funding process, and if you don't have a BPAC, to put one in place in time to receive the funding. And I took note of that because I know we used to have a BPAC and now it's enveloped under the Traffic and Transportation Commission. I don't know if that qualifies. There was a lot of discussion about having BPACs that actually follow that wording, that titling. So that might be something for staff to look into where we stand on that particular issue. A cultural note, today is Korean and Chinese Thanksgiving. Tonight's the first harvest moon, and that's why they celebrate their Thanksgiving today. So just thought I'd take note of that. I was at the plantation, and they were telling me about it because they're Korean there, and they told me how to say it, but I've forgotten now, so I can't get it out, John. Sorry. And then the last item is I was wanting to raise an issue at the council, something that we might want to look at. There's been articles in the paper about how the PG&E fine is unfair in the direction the money is going, because predominantly it's going to the state general fund as things stand now, instead of going to pipeline safety improvement. And I thought that might be something we might want to take up as a discussion item as a council, and perhaps we send a letter, if we would be in favor of this, to, I suppose it would be the governor, saying, you know, we would be in favor of a predominant amount of the money going to pipeline safety and not just being dumped into the state general fund.
Actually, that was something that had been of interest to me too, Matt, so let's see if we can put that on the agenda for an
Very good.
upcoming meeting.
Okay.
And Jeff, if my colleagues would concur with this also, I think as part of that, I wouldn't mind getting an update on where things stand with Line 147, the testing regime. Is that okay? Everybody all right? All right, fine. Anything else, Matt?
That's it.
Bob?
Mr. Mayor, I attended the 15th anniversary celebration that Cameron indicated earlier. And on Sunday, I attended the San Mateo County Interfaith Public Safety Memorial Service. That was the 13th one that they've had in the county, and it honors all the fallen firefighters, police officers, emergency response personnel in the county that have fallen in the past year, as well as retired folks who have been deceased in the past year. And I think it's really important to mention this, because I think most of us know how important it is to have our public safety folks out there. And this service, it lasts about an hour, and they name all the names of the folks that have passed in the last year that have been retired or that have died in the line of duty, in addition to every person who has died in the line of duty in this county from time back that they've kept records. And it's like as I said, it's a very moving situation to attend this, and I recommend if next year folks can get a chance to do it on a Sunday morning. I know it's hard, but to honor the folks that protect us every day quietly and silently, but when they go to work, there's no guarantee that they're going to come back home. And this is to honor those folks that have given the ultimate sacrifice in service to the folks in San Mateo County. So that's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also attended the 15th anniversary of the Youth Center, And wasn't really much going on the last couple of weeks, but a couple of things I wanted to talk about that I wanted to maybe get the indulgence of the council on, and that is that I also attended the Symphony at Sunset in it was late August that benefited the benefits of Parks and Recreation Foundation. And given that we had the land swap issue a couple months ago, which also raised the issue of fields and recreational uses, I thought maybe in the wake of these recent experiences, to me it would really be appropriate now that we should evaluate all city-owned facilities, recreational facilities that is, and see what our capacity is, what our usage is, and what that would mean in additional revenue if we were to utilize these facilities to their potential. So what I'd like to ask is if there's an agreement on the council to request that staff prepare a report for the council so that we can evaluate our recreational assets and then make some informed decisions about what options might make sense for us to pursue in the future.
Jeff, what would be what do you think the resource footprint of pulling something like that together would be?
I think the initial report would require a little more than staff time to pull together, sort of a study session report to council type item. Probably take us 4 to 6 weeks to do that, given the current workload. But I would think the footprint would be pretty small. If what I understand is basically the question is, tell the council how we're utilizing our facilities now and what, if any, ability we'd have to utilize them to a greater extent for our own recreational type programming, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Just speaking for myself, I would support adding that to the agenda, but I would want to see the discussion be a little bit broader about not just existing facilities, but what we might do in terms of additional facilities. Because one of the things that concerns me that's happened in the last few weeks is the school district did announce that they're going to leave Charter Learning Center at Tierra Linda, which basically means one of the 2 fields at Tierra Linda is going to be taken out. So we are going to be going backwards in terms of our field capacity. So I think it's great to do an inventory, but I'd also like to have a discussion of where we go from here.
No, I think that'd be fine.
Okay, then we will add that to the agenda after staff's had a chance to put that report together. Anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Well, it seems like a lot of us were at the Youth Center 15th anniversary.
And the symphony.
And the symphony, right? So I'll just mention I was there as well. It was very well attended, and it's a wonderful facility that we have for the kids in our town. The only other thing I'll mention is that I was at a fairly lengthy SBWMA board meeting last week where we were discussing, it was closed session discussion, so I can't tell you what we actually talked about other than the subject, which was the annual review process, basically, for the executive director. We will move on from there. So, Jeff, anything from staff on comments on city administrative business?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 2 items I'd like to mention tonight for the council and public's benefit. Later this week, the City of San Carlos will launch its new online community forum known as Shape San Carlos, our open town hall. The goal of this forum will be to introduce topics of discussion to engage the community on city issues. The first topic, we looked at a number, but for timing reasons, the first topic that we're going to need to go with is going to be the housing element, which is currently underway, and the city is soliciting feedback from the public through a number of sources in public meetings. So we will begin that later this week so that we can conclude it in time to get that information for the housing element to use it to inform the rest of the process. Residents will be asked to tell the council and staff what they think we should know about housing in San Carlos. The community will also be able to access the topic from the city's website, and we hope that this tool will increase participation in San Carlos and transparency in our local government. We're also going to be looking at some topics in the very near future dealing with volunteerism in San Carlos and possibly some drought-related issues. I also wanted to mention Holly Street. As the council is aware, we have a project scheduled to begin next week. to redo striping and parking hour signage on Hawley. The project is scheduled to begin on September 15th, but work will actually begin on the 16th. The Hawley Street restriping will be done Tuesday night starting at 8 p.m. and finishing by 6 a.m. The street will be closed to through traffic at Industrial Road and Old County Road. Residents will be able to access their homes coming and going during this period with possible short delays if they happen to be laying down the stripe right in front of your driveway, depending on where the contractor is at that specific moment. There will be a flag man at each end of the project at all times, and residents will just have to identify that they live on Hawley to get in. Residents will not be able to park on the street that night so that the contractor can complete the striping work as efficiently as possible. They're also going to be laying down parking T-striping in that area where cars would typically park at night. Restriping under the railroad undercrossing on Hawley and replacement of parking signs on Hawley Street will be done on Wednesday night, starting at 8 p.m. and finishing at 6 a.m. Hawley Street might be open and available to residents for parking on Wednesday night, depending on the success of the work the first night, the Tuesday night. Residents will not be able to park on the street overnight on Wednesday night. If all of the work is completed on Hawley the first night, we will allow them to park the second night, but we just can't commit to that right now. Flyers will be distributed to all residents' homes by Thursday of this week, and we will be putting out press release and e-notify to residents as well.
Actually, you reminded me of one other thing I was going to mention, drought-related. Given the notification letters that have come around to all the homeowners in San Carlos, property owners, in the last few weeks, now's a great time if you haven't had an opportunity to fix your sprinkler heads so they're not watering the sidewalk. Great time to do it. So with that, we'll move on to item 6A, presentation from Housing Endowment and Regional Trust to discuss ways cities can approach affordable housing issues. Ron, I believe you're introducing our presenter.
I am. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a member of the HART Board, HART standing for Housing Endowment and Regional Trust, it's my pleasure to introduce Mark Moulton, who is the Executive Director of HART, and he's here tonight to give us a presentation on our housing programs in San Mateo County. So with that, Mark?
Thanks very much, Ron. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. We are going to set up by just showing you a short movie that we created to try and describe one of our HART programs, and then I'll try and put a context around that and be very brief and then take questions.
Okay.
My name is Timothy Keegren. I grew up in Foster City, California. Went to all my schooling in Foster City. 2003, I joined the Marine Corps as a reserve. So I got to stay home and work civilian jobs in 2004. At one of the jobs I was working at, Tiffany walked in to apply for a job and was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Luckily, she was persistent and stuck with it and got me to take her on a date. A month after I got out, and she didn't officially have to worry about me anymore, we finally got married.
We were fortunate enough to give birth to our son TJ in 2011, and then 2 years later, 2013, we had our daughter Leilani.
To help take care of the family today, I'm working 2 jobs. I work about 65, 70 hours a week. I've had plenty of friends and seen, families, that you live with, grew up with, having to move out of here because they got priced out and they can't afford it here.
The challenge at the moment is extraordinary. It seems like the word crisis is overused, but there has never been, in my career, a crisis as bad as the affordable crisis is right now in terms of housing in San Mateo County.
Today in the county, there are 6 or 7 low-wage families for every 1 low-cost housing unit. We already have a shortage of affordable housing. In order to afford the average apartment rent in San Mateo County today, you need to earn over $80,000 a year. Teachers in this county earn on average about $70,000. Paramedics about $50,000. These are the folks who are driving our economy, and they're getting priced out of the region.
HART was founded in San Mateo County with the express goal of trying to make sure that we built more affordable housing particularly to take care of the workforce in San Mateo County. Since its founding, HART has raised almost $13 million to provide almost 950 affordable living units in San Mateo County.
Together, working with HART and with our city and county partners, we have the formula. We know how to create great housing. And when folks move into these units, it's an incredible experience.
When my family first came to visit us, especially my brother, he was stunned. He said, it's like living in a resort. Everything's brand new. They have great just appliances here. The carpet's beautiful. There's a lot of space. Right outside our front door is a beautiful children's playground. So, we can take TJ out there, and he gets so excited.
The creation of housing is especially difficult because the county is, by and large, what's called built out. About 2/3 of the county is either permanent open space or agricultural, and the 1/3 that is buildable has, by and large, been built. Over the last several years, the situation's gotten worse as we've needed more affordable housing. Federal funds have been cut drastically. State funds, bond issues have been used, and other state funds have been cut. And redevelopment agencies have met their demise.
So the role that HART plays, along with city and county financing, is more important than ever. It's that nimble, early stage money that helps us do pre-development work and entitlement work so that we can then go compete for state and federal sources.
Last year, I had the privilege of carrying a piece of legislation which took money that would have been converted at the state level into state bureaucracies and instead made it available to housing trust funds. But it's limited state dollars, and our prospect of the state continues to be limited for future funding.
Not a single development in this county in its history has been done by one entity or one jurisdiction. Every one of them has a partnership of nonprofits, cities, and the county, and that is the only way that things can happen.
Decent, affordable housing is a basic right as far as I'm concerned, and something that we need to work very hard at providing to our communities. Our goal is to be able to provide 400 to 500 new housing units per year for the next 10 years. That would represent roughly 14 to 15% of the anticipated number of units that's going to be needed in the next 10 years.
We need to work even harder collectively as a San Mateo County community to take care of the housing needs for all of our people who live here.
I don't think that we would be able to be where we're at right now and provide for our 2 kids had we not got this opportunity. We were struggling with just to buy diapers for one, let alone having the other one. So we can give them the life that they actually do deserve. And it's very promising that our kids are not going to have to go through the struggle that we had to go through.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. This was shown last year at our lunch where we had almost 400 folks and about 60 elected folks, and where we were glad to have Councilmember Grisilli there because he's a big supporter. Part of why I wanted to talk to you tonight was because it's back again to school for us, and what we're trying to get ready to do is to make good on the promise that Jack Matthews was talking about in the movie, to increase our funding at HART. What you saw was the impact on one family of a large loan that we made of $1 million to Mid-Penn Housing to build units in South San Francisco. But that's only one of our programs. The other one also involves providing money for young families, mostly, who want to buy their first home. So we do both ownership and also multifamily rental affordable housing. I just wanted to talk to you for a minute. I know you all have been through 8 years of discussion and have finally approved some housing down here at San Carlos Avenue in El Camino. You know, I think, that it's a very, very fraught to build new housing. You also know, and you've heard, what a great need there is for housing. Part of our point to being here tonight to talk to you is to say HART wants to help. We've raised $13 million or more so far. We've been involved in almost 1,000 doors in the last 10 years. We want to be involved in many more hundreds of doors in the next 10 years. I would be, I think, overreaching to make a presentation to you about the ways cities can approach affordable housing issues, but I would be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions for Mark? I have one if nobody else does. I just was curious, Mark, about whether there are initiatives, and maybe that HART has been involved with some. I don't think this is the proper term for it, but I tend to think of it as mixed-use housing and parking.
You talking at the state level, or are you talking about getting zoning passed where?
No, I guess I'm thinking of interest from developers and people like HART working with developers to create situations where in addition to creating affordable housing, you're also creating parking resources.
Like for downtowns.
Like for downtowns, right.
Sure. I think there will be no proposition that any city can make that's interested in revitalizing its downtown that people won't take a look at seriously now. I think there has to be something in it for them. Mm-hmm. And, maybe a density bonus or something like that. But, we seem to have climbed back out of wherever it was we were in 2008. And I would just say, make a proposition.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, Ron.
Thanks, Mark.
Night.
All right. With that, we'll take public comment on items not on the agenda. If you wish to address the council on items that are on the agenda, you'll have an opportunity to do that at each item. I have 2 cards currently. If you wish to address the council, please fill one out. And excuse me, we have 1. You're right, because 1 is on a particular item. Thank you, Crystal. So if you wish to address the council on items not on the agenda, please fill out one of these cards and give it to Crystal. So, Bob Stafford.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I want to compliment you on picking up really the issue of how we deal with cars, both moving and those that are parked. And we know that policy shift in this area is coming, and paradigm shift really allows us to look at an example of zip cars. Think about fractionalized shares of cars 20 years ago. We would have thought they were insane. Think about parking in the same way. Private parking spaces are available in this community in the off hours. On behalf of the Laurel Oak Trust at 1580 Laurel Street, I'd like to offer 4 parking spaces for this type of program whereby the public could find these parking spaces on an app, the owner could receive some financial benefit, and equally important, the city could solve one of the problems that is vexing right now, which is where is everyone going to park that's going to all the good restaurants? So with that, I just wanted to preemptively offer this concept to the council, and specifically on behalf of this trust. We look for your feedback in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Very generous offer, which we will keep in mind. I have a second card here from Vince Passanisi.
Got it. Just in time, guys. Hello, City Council. My name is Vince Passanisi. I grew up on Chesham, over by the Devonshire Little Store. I graduated from Cal Poly last June after 5 years studying accounting. Got a master's in tax, and now I work for KPMG. And that's sort of what's brought me here today. See, KPMG sponsors one leg of the Applied Materials Silicon Valley Turkey Trot. And last year, being one of the more boisterous accountants of the group, I was rallied in to manage our tent. So that involved getting up around 3:30 or so in the morning, driving down to downtown San Jose, setting up our tent, putting our big banner up, and organizing bagels, coffee, fruit, and stuff for the runners. Now, I stayed all day until about 11, saw all the races go by, and had a great time. And so here I am now, asking you guys to join one leg of one of those races called the Mayor's Cup. So to back up a step about the Turkey Trot, we're in our 10th year. We've got 4 great nonprofits, one of which is the Second Harvest Food Bank of San Mateo County. This year we're looking for 30,000 participants with 2,000 volunteers, myself included, and we're hoping to raise about $1 million. Of those other legs of the races, besides the Mayor's Cup, we've got the First 5 Kids Fun Run. We've got the Quickest Caught Fastest Firefighter Challenge, which is our event. The Virgin America San Jose Mercury News Costume Competition, and then, of course, the Mayor's Cup. So we're hoping that personally you guys would participate in the Mayor's Cup. What happens is, well, you see, last year we got 0 city council participants and 76 San Carlos residents participating. And what you do, you get a certain number of points for members of the city council who are registered. And you just put a little box when you register, and they'll check. I can't say I'm the mayor now. And points are counted depending on the size of your town. So San Carlos falls into the range of other cities such as high school rivals Burlingame, Menlo Park. Growing up, we always had sort of a rivalry with Belmont, so I'd love to beat them out. And then other towns, East Palo Alto, Foster City, Los Altos, Los Gatos, and Saratoga. So if we could get all you guys to sign up, I know we'd win. Now, you don't have to...
Vince, we usually give people about 2 minutes. You're a little bit over that.
Am I over?
Yes.
All right, I got you. If you guys sign up for the Mayor's Cup, I'm going to leave some brochures for you. I'll leave a business card. Here's what happens. We get bragging rights. We get recognition at the race and post-race press. I'm sorry, I didn't see a timer. But most importantly, we get the Mayor's Cup for display. Well, wherever you want. It's yours if you win it. So I'm going to leave some brochures. I'll leave a couple business cards. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Vince.
I'll sign up.
If I sign up, do I have to run or can I just walk? Or
You don't have to. We have this really cool thing going on. You mind if I pass these out to you?
Okay, go ahead.
This really cool thing going on this year called the Remote Runner Program.
I like that. That sounds really good to me. That sounds really good, the remote runner.
Can I get a Vince?
The golf cart runner.
Sort of like
I can use a golf
Yeah, we'll mail you a bib.
Yeah.
Mail me a bib.
You can take a picture, you know,
A great-
Thanksgiving morning.
perfect. Thanks, Vince. Thank you.
Sign up online.
Yeah, sign up online.
Thanks. Thanks for taking the time.
I'll grab them all.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Vince. We'll now do approval of the consent calendar. These are items that are approved by the council en masse without discussion, although council members can ask to have one or more items removed and be considered separately. Are there any items that council members would like to remove? Hearing none, then I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to approve consent calendar items 8A through 8H.
Is there a second?
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Basili?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. Okay, that brings us to item 9A, study session, discuss and provide direction on potential amendments to city solicitation ordinances, section 5.44 and 5.48, regarding regulation of unwanted solicitation and delivery of newspapers, flyers, handbills, and solicitation in residential and retail areas. Greg, something tells me this is your item.
This is my item. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This came out of the strategic plan 6 months ago. The council gave me direction to explore some of the issues that with unsolicited flyers, handbills, newspapers that people did not have subscriptions for. And I did some preliminary research, and that's included in the staff report about the types of ordinances that other cities have tried. I looked at more jurisdictions than what's attached to the staff report, but these seem to be exemplars of ordinances that run from very complex to simpler to something like we have now currently in San Carlos, where we don't regulate handbills and flyers at all. So the idea is to get some input from the council on what issues you'd like to see addressed, issues that the public may have that would like to see included in an ordinance. What I've indicated in the staff report is there are some constitutional issues that relate to freedom of expression and communication and press from the First Amendment that we need to be addressed. But you could see the solutions that other cities have come up with a permitting system or a registration or sort of like it's called a do not knock list in the city of Claremont. Post sample signs to put in your yard, but that raises some other issues of clutter that might not be so appealing for the council or the community. But some of those solutions were all designed to get around this constitutional issue. We can't regulate the content of speech. What we can regulate, content of speech, but what we can do is regulate conduct. And so conduct is something that if it's content neutral, we can regulate under the Constitution. So with that, if there are any questions about some of the ordinances or just this is a study session. We're not asking you to take action tonight. We're just trying to get input for the purpose of bringing back an ordinance in the future.
Thank you, Greg. Questions for staff?
I had a couple of questions. I remember it seemed like, I guess I was on the Planning Commission 20-some odd years ago, or I think it was when I was on Planning Commission, we talked about newspaper racks. And it would seem like this is a little bit connected. I don't know if there's anything in that area where we could somehow, use some of those things to try to, regulate. I have a difficult time understanding how you could regulate someone just walking down the street and handing out a flyer or a paper or whatever. And then I guess, let's say you set an ordinance or a fee. Okay, let's say they went and paid the fee. Then why wouldn't they be able to then, let's say, a newspaper just said, well, it's free, but we'll follow the rules and we'll pay you a fee and still then deliver it to everybody. That's the thing that's a quandary to me.
Yeah, the news rack regulation came out of litigation brought by newspapers when various municipalities tried to regulate the location of news racks. You can see examples of it in San Carlos now where there's places on Laurel Street where there are concentrations of news racks. Mm-hmm. So that's a time, place, and manner restriction that's permissible under the Constitution. What we had before that was just people attaching a news rack to every pole with a chain. And so once in a while you still see some of that. Those are not regulated, and there might be an enforcement issue with some of those. But basically the solution that resolved that was to have established news racks on the public sidewalk. There could be some issues where that are there if someone's handing a flyer which is informational. So we have to be careful on that content neutral. We have to treat we have to ignore the message and just go for the conduct. So having a permit system helps us in a couple of ways. One is from an enforcement standpoint. If someone doesn't have a permit, it's a lot easier to cite someone for failing to get a permit because that's completely content neutral, as opposed to, hey, you're soliciting. Which raises and exposes the enforcement officer of the city to a claim that you violated civil rights because you didn't like my message. And so what we try and do is craft. So that's the reason for a permitting system. It gives us some ability to regulate. And that it goes to the reasons why you would have such a system. I alluded to some of those in the staff report about crime, clutter, people, using the handing out of a handbill or a flyer as a pretext. A simple example might be, if someone parks a car in their driveway, it's on private property, and people put a handbill in the windshield wiper, and then they wait to see if that car ever moves. Well, because the handbill's still there, is that a safety or security issue? It may be, but that's content neutral. We don't care what you put there. It's that you put something there without getting registered and having a permit. those are examples of how we can handle it. The other is the more active solicitation is the Claremont or the Palos Verdes, Rancho Palos Verdes solutions, where they basically say, if there's a sign there, you can't solicit at the house. Because, again, content neutral, the theory is that's content neutral. We're just saying you cannot go on someone's property for the when they've got a sign there saying don't come on their property. So we're trying to get around some of the constitutional issues that have come up in cities. A few years ago, just to give you an example of where you can't really regulate is, or it's difficult to regulate, is casual laborers. San Mateo had an ordinance that they tried to enforce, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, that just said you can't put yourself out for labor on the public sidewalk or block traffic. And they tried to say they were blocking traffic by soliciting on the streets. And the court shot down San Mateo's then ordinance, which they've improved since then, on the basis that that was protected speech. People soliciting work is protected speech. So we just have to be careful about those issues in crafting our ordinance. But just to be a little more focused about what would help me in drafting the ordinances is identifying compelling public interests of why we want to regulate certain, in a content neutral manner, certain types of activities, and to what we want to regulate. What's the problem that we're perceiving right now that you want to make sure we regulate? So I put a few of them. A few of them are already discussed by the council, but there may be more, and there may be some other issues the public have to add.
Other comments, questions? Matt?
So you've talked about some of the areas like handbills and so forth. Can you get a little bit more specific regarding newspapers? How we can craft an ordinance that limits newspaper delivery?
Well, I think we have to come up with a compelling interest, and I think the best way is to look at what some of the other cities have done, and that is to develop a way to communicate that you're not to deliver a newspaper here, and then this is the direction I'm going. But newspapers do have some issues that just in discussing with individual council members and frankly my neighbors, is they accumulate. They create a security issue, I think, for the homeowner when they go on vacation, when they get wet in the wintertime, because the throwaway papers tend to not have the quality plastic wrapper around them, and so they get wet and they're useless. They can clog up our storm drains. They're sort of wasteful to have all this newsprint laying around on people's yards. And some of the newspapers that do deliver in this way through their business program, in developing this, I actually took up one of the papers on their offer on their website to cancel delivery at my own home to see what would happen. And for about 2 or 3 weeks, the paper was not delivered, and then it resumed again. Don't know why, but I asked not to have it delivered to my house, and I think it's a combination of a lot of different things. But obviously, the self-policing is not working in some cases, so we have to figure out a way to address that. But yeah, there's an issue because every newspaper has content in it, and there's a strong history of protecting the freedom of the press in our country, so we have to be sensitive to that. But if we could develop a compelling governmental interest why that's not desirable, that would lead us in a content neutral manner. That would lead us to an enforceable ordinance.
Cameron?
Thanks, Greg. For me, this issue is entirely about newspapers, and it's specifically about the San Francisco Examiner. And I've heard from a number of residents. I, too, have tried to take myself off the list and have tried 5, 6, 7 times. I finally flagged down the driver in front of my home at 6 o'clock in the morning and asked him, where's the list? How do I get off the list? And he told me there was no list, but that he would personally remember my house and stop delivering, which he did for a couple of weeks. And then it resumed again. If you look online, you see just endless reviews of people frustrated because the paper doesn't honor residents' requests to not have it delivered, and it's obvious why, because the business model is about hitting as many homes as possible. And the term newspaper is a pretty thin description of what it is. It's largely advertising, and there's a little veneer of news on top of it to sort of cloak it as a newspaper. I do think, the reasons that you cited are very compelling. It's a nuisance. It does signal to people that no one is home. When you go on vacation, you can call the post office and tell them to stop delivering your paper. If you call the San Francisco Examiner and say, please don't deliver my paper, I'm going on vacation for a month, they will continue to deliver it. There is no real way to get rid of it. And I think the waste issue is very important. I looked on their advertising site and I did some math. Over 300,000 newspapers are delivered by the San Francisco Examiner in San Carlos every year, and I would guess that most people do not want them. I would guess most of them go directly into the waste bin without being read, and those are processed at public expense. So I think that it is very frustrating to residents. It's frustrating to me. I've heard it many times from many residents, and I think there ought to be a way to stop it. One last thing I'll say is that in recent years, Congress passed a national do not call list that made it so that as an individual, I can tell telemarketers not to call my home. They also passed a anti-spam legislation, which means that for any unsolicited email, there has to be an unsubscribe option that has to be honored. So I can make it so that people can't call me at home. I can make it so that people can't send me email, but there is no way to get the San Francisco Examiner to stop throwing their newspaper on my lawn. So I think there's a very compelling public interest. I definitely, as you might imagine, think we should pursue this. My question to you is, what is the best mechanism to do it? What's the best enforceable mechanism? I don't think that we should spend staff time, staff expense, your time on something that is not enforceable. But I know there have been constitutional issues, and I think the broader issue of handbills and leaflets is interesting and valid, but I'm most interested in unsolicited newspapers where a company has the resources to send armies of delivery cars around every Sunday morning throwing newspapers on people's lawns.
Well, I didn't mention, Councilmember Johnson, I didn't mention earlier that there is a move afoot in San Francisco to try to enact an ordinance that would create a fine system for unsolicited newspaper delivery. And I haven't been able to track down a copy of that proposed ordinance because it's just a proposal now. Councilmember Grocott shared a newspaper article with me on that. The reason I included handbills and other things that are admittedly a little lower on the radar is because that's how the subject came up. And there is a category of unwanted solicitation that seems to proliferate in St. Carlos, and it's I'll call it the little pink paper in plastic with a rock, and it's thrown on your yard, and sometimes it's for gardening, sometimes it's for other types of services, and that seemed to be in the same category of unwanted solicitation. So again, it is going to be a challenge. I don't want to say it's going to be a snap of the fingers, but what I would bring back an ordinance that I think has the most success or the most chance of being successful regulation without getting us into a situation where the newspapers think it's inappropriate. And I'll probably reach out to the newspapers and say, hey, here's a draft ordinance I'm considering. What comments do you have? And that is a procedure I used when I was proposing for the council's consideration the massage therapy ordinance. I actually ran it by the massage therapy organization and got them to make a few edits which were not objectionable to me and met the community need. And we haven't had any problem with that. In fact, we think it's been fairly successful in San Carlos. So that's one way to try and, shake out if there's any major problems with whatever we're proposing.
Sure.
The chair.
Matt, Ron had a question that he wanted to ask, and actually, I also like to remind everybody we're doing questions now. not discussion. So, Ron.
Thank you, Mark. I guess my question is that recognizing that there's this constitutional issue that we can't tell newspaper companies don't throw papers on people's properties, can we control the method of delivery? In other words, say something like if you're going to deliver a newspaper to somebody, you have to mail it. So they have to stick it in the mail. Now, the other thing I thought about was, what if we created a list that, like Cameron was referring to the do not call list, and we said to the newspapers, here's a list of residents that don't want you to deliver the paper. We're not telling you not to deliver it, but we have an ordinance that says if our residents request it and we present it to you, then we're going to enforce it. I don't know what the legal issues are surrounding that, but I'm trying to think of creative ways to get around the whole constitutional or the First Amendment issue.
I think that the first comment is I think there might be problems. It's an interesting concept, but there might be problems regulating the way things are delivered, just because by the nature of how newspapers are delivered, they're using the public streets, so it would be difficult to enforce, just off the top of my head, how to mandate a certain delivery method. But the Claremont has largely tried that do not knock or registry for the solicitation side of it, and I think that holds some promise that the city could publish, residents could give the city a list that they did not want it delivered, and then we would publish that, and then we would provide, so the delivery person has to have notice that they might be violating it, and that's the signage, so that whoever's delivering it could see, oh, I'm not supposed to deliver to this house, because obviously if there is no list, that we've heard from Councilmember Johnson that there's no list, it's just delivered to every home, then that might address that issue in a content neutral manner. So there might be other ways that we can do it through permitting or other time, place, and manner like restrictions, but maybe that's another one. No deliveries before 10 a.m. Well, most of those are delivered early in the morning, so that's a time, place, and manner restriction. But I feel more comfortable knowing that the organizations that might sue us would be comfortable with some of it, and then giving you the pros and cons of whether or not we have a risk of litigation over some particular provision.
Thanks.
Matt?
So a follow-up question on enforcement, because when you talked about the little baggies with the rock, I recall when I lived up on Shelford, oftentimes I'd get those same type of things, and then they would start putting them on the flag on the mailbox. And I recall calling the post office about that, and it seems to me that came back to it's a policing issue. So I'm just the reason where I'm going with the question is you put an ordinance in place. What's the probability of actually enforcing something, even though you have something on the books?
Generally, there's two ways of enforcing a municipal code. The first way is what you talked about, Councilmember Grocott, is the police catch somebody doing something and they issue a citation, and then we prosecute that in a criminal way. The second way is through injunctive relief or going to the civil courts and getting orders to tell someone not to do something. And both ways have merit. One is probably a little more quick than the other, but sometimes a civil injunction gets you the more permanent relief that you're really after. And we'd have to address those on a case-by-case basis. We could have an ordinance, for example, saying you can't, and we do have some regulation about putting signs on public property. We might be able to extend that to signs, unsolicited placement of things on public, on like a mailbox or something like that. That again, we really have to be careful about getting that public purpose lined up. So that might be a public purpose for that might be it's unsightly, it's a nuisance, it detracts from the aesthetics of the community. There's things that we can put into the findings that you would adopt in such an ordinance, and so that's part of what I'm looking for again tonight is those types of compelling, those types of interests that we can put into the findings of an ordinance. And obviously I've thought of a few, but but it helps to have it with as many different issues as we can.
Just a follow-up question then, if I may. Is a compelling argument, for public safety or crime? Because like in the case of somebody, the concern with somebody putting something on your mailbox is if people, your neighbors, even if you have Crime Watch in your neighborhood, and people get used to that and say, well, nobody cares that you're touching a mailbox, which is a federal offense. And the next thing you know, they're opening your mailbox and taking out, those credit card things you get. And, so it could lead to crime is my point. Is that a compelling reason or not?
I think it could be. I think other cities have used that. I'm thinking of New York City's strategy to address crime in the late 90s, and the graffiti and the way you cover up graffiti right after it happens, so that it doesn't, so it's not encouraged, so people don't think it's tolerated, so it tends to reduce crime rates. We just want to point to a study, I think, in that, and we could do some research on it. But crime is overall. The issue of crime and security of our residents, I think, is a compelling interest. We just want to make sure that that's stated.
Greg, a couple of questions. Let me start with one that sounds rhetorical, but it's not meant to be. But as I was listening to the byplay, when does something become litter?
Litter, I would say a very simple explanation is when it's discarded. Okay. And not intended to be used any longer, something along those lines.
That sounds like a unsolicited newspaper sitting on a public sidewalk
very
on
well
somebody's
could be.
Driveway.
Right.
That because nobody has an intention, So I leave it to you as another possible avenue is the litter approach, because we clearly regulate litter. Okay.
Litter, and I think. Because of our experience with San Francisco Baykeepers and the upcoming stormwater regulations, I think a compelling interest could be made for the deteriorated newsprint that I see just as a walker in town when I'm walking my dogs, personally. In the rainy season, the newspapers become just a soggy pile of newsprint. Yeah, they're not usable. They definitely are litter at that point.
I agree with that. I'm just broadening it a little bit because I think actually, to me, I started thinking about, well, okay, somebody drops it. Not that we go around and cite people for this, but technically, you drop a piece of paper on the sidewalk and walk off and have no intention of picking it up after you've just littered. That's a violation of the law. Okay.
Up to $1,000 fine.
How is that different from dropping a newspaper on an unsolicited newspaper? I know that a newspaper is different than a handbill, but anyway, I'll leave it to you to look into. I think it may be something worth doing. The other question I had is, you talked about regulating time, place, and manner. Would that extend to requiring, basically saying, look, you can deliver as many, you can deliver unsolicited newspapers in San Carlos, but in order to do that, you have to have a control system that lets people opt out. In other words, we're happy to have you deliver stuff, but you have to have a way for Cameron to say, don't give me any more newspapers.
Amen.
Right. Could that be a reasonable thing, or is that overreaching because we're interfering with speech again?
I think there's promise in that method. Because it's content neutral. It's not.
You're saying, we'll let anybody do it. You have to be able to demonstrate that you have a way of cutting it off.
Right.
When somebody says they don't want it. The other thought that I had is, or question I had, is a different approach of one. An organization can distribute unsolicited newspapers, but they are obligated to go around and pick them up if they're not taken inside by the resident within 24 hours.
And through the chair, inside the Examiner, they advertise that they have a quote-unquote green team that does exactly that, although I have never seen it, nor I know of anyone who's ever seen it.
Reminds me of a famous ad involving the Uranus Corp from the 1970s, which I'll tell you about later. But,
in answer to your question, Mr. Mayor, that might possibly be a method we can employ. I think we'd have to, narrowly tailor. It has to kind of fit a requirement that is reasonable.
Well, the issue, where I was going with it, the reason I asked the question is I'm trying to balance the free speech side of things with, it's another way of looking at the litter side of things, okay? Free speech does not guarantee free listeners. People can choose to, you can step up in your soapbox, and if people walk by you, you can't grab them and restrain them and say, you must listen to me, okay? You just have a right to make your points. And this potentially would be a way of doing that is if somebody wants the thing, they want your content, then they'll take it in. If not, you have to remove it. The other question I wanted to ask you is a little bit broader, and it gets to this notion of enforcement, because I think, like other people have said up here, I'm a little leery about having to go hire a bunch of CSOs to go around enforcing this. Although I do agree it's a serious issue. I don't mean to make light of it. Is there an approach we could use that would create some kind of, I'm going to use the word right, but I don't think that's the correct legal term, a right for a resident to pursue compensation? In other words, where we wouldn't have to enforce it, but we basically say, look, you violate the rules, and Cameron's going to sue you in small claims court, and he's got basis for doing that now. Because we're trying to create a sort of feedback loop that doesn't involve us.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, Mr. Mayor, because I could see the council declaring unwanted delivery of newspapers to be a nuisance, but which creates potentially a private right of action to go to small claims court to say, see, the city council's declared newspapers to be a nuisance, and it cost me X dollars to remove this newspaper every week because you could create a private cause of action. Is it practical on a daily basis or on a weekly basis because each one is there? I don't know, but the other thing it occurred to me in your last comment was you creating a do not call registry for newspapers, we'll just call it that, might create an incentive, with some teeth in enforcement, might create an incentive to have a real do not subscribe system rather than having to deal with code enforcement from a locality. They just say, okay, yeah, we really will have a list of all the addresses, and we really will honor requests for delivery, and then we'll rely on the merits of our product to ask people to resubscribe, for example, to the free newspaper. We do have a lot of examples in town of free newspapers that are successful, and they don't rely on that model. They have news racks, they sell advertising, they do other things, and they don't do this same delivery method that clogs our storm drains and causes litter and accumulation of these problems that we've talked about tonight.
Last question from me anyway at this point. Your last comment made me think of something. Would there be a way to say that we simply forbid the delivery of unsolicited newspapers to I'll say residential addresses, just to have something to talk about, on the basis of the fact that we do make available areas for people to put boxes in, just like you said for the Daily Journal and the Daily Post and the Daily News? Or is that considered too broad? You're interfering with
Well, I guess an argument could be made that it's content neutral, but I think there's some other layers to the analysis that we'd have to be careful about. Identifying the compelling interest and then also least intrusive methodology. It comes into I might not be using the exact same term.
Probably doesn't pass the least intrusive
Yeah.
methodology test. Okay. We do have, we will have some discussion after this, so we can make sure we've given staff the direction for moving forward. But we do have one speaker card. If there's anybody else who wishes to address the council on this item, please fill it out. John Hoffman.
Mr. Mayor, council members, John Hoffman, Crestview Drive, San Carlos. Although there is a constitutional right to free speech, as was pointed out earlier, there is no constitutional right to be heard, to be paid attention to accept, or to litter. So I think although you will find that anybody opposing this will bring an attorney who threatens you with terrible things because of the Constitution, you will find that there are ways in which you can regulate this thing, put it out of business. Maybe that would be the ideal, I would think. And I don't think you can rely on the examiner to do a proper job on an opt-out basis or even an opt-in basis, although my opinion is you never have an opt-out, you always must have an opt-in, and it should be a written basis. The right to refuse should be paramount. That's the individual's right. You cannot be made to buy insurance for a national health scheme, so says the Supreme Court. This, as I see it, falls into a very similar category, and you are being forced to accept something you do not wish to accept. The Dutch have a very good and very effective system. On every residential mailbox, there are 2 stickers. There's a green sticker if you will accept bulk mailed items, and there was an orange sticker if you will refuse those. The postal system handles that very conveniently, and there are very few bulk mails because so many people have the orange sticker. You have to understand that orange is a big color in the Netherlands. I really believe that it's doable. There should be a fine that would be significant and very possibly require a bond, because if you simply say we're going to fine somebody, the newspaper will, on paper, sell it to the delivery guy, who's frequently a Mexican or a couple of Mexicans driving a beat-up pickup truck. And the idea that that an individual is going to take those folks to court and get anything out of it is ludicrous. The reason that it stops for only a couple of weeks is they find a couple of other guys to do the delivery who were never talked to. Please make a city ordinance that cures this problem.
Thank you, John. Does anybody else wish to address the council on this item? Okay, discussion, and sort of I think discussion in terms focused on giving staff direction. Let me throw something out there. I didn't hear a unanimity about this, but I think I heard a number of people say that their primary concern is about unsolicited newspapers.
Correct.
And that might be the place to start. And not go beyond that. So that's one important thing for Greg to hear.
Actually, I would take it further, because to the one other item, which is, the little plastic bag with the rock in it, offering gardening services and that sort of thing. It can be just as much of a nuisance. If enough of them collect on your driveway while you're on vacation, it sends a signal. Those particular types of solicitations are very similar to the newspaper problem in a number of ways.
I understand conceptually. For me, I have to say, Matt, that the frequency of delivery.
Yeah, they're not as often.
The examiner comes every day.
Yeah.
So, but is there anybody else who would support extending it the way Matt was suggesting? Okay, then we're not making decisions tonight, so we'll obviously have
Yeah, I
an
know.
opportunity to revisit this, but I just want to make sure staff has some
I guess, if I may, the thing I'm saying is, they seem similar enough that as Greg is looking at options of drafting some kind of ordinance, if you can sweep one in with the other, why not?
Leave it for Greg, yeah, and if he may have to.
He may have to.
I think I know, I saw you were taking notes. You jotted down a bunch of the concerns that were raised about serious public interests, or the public interest that we think. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add that they haven't?
I mean, I would just say I defer to Greg, but it sounds like from reading the memo and from what you have said that providing an opt-out list for residents may be the most effective means. But again, I defer to you. But I'm looking personally for something that we believe has a reasonable chance of enforcement.
Actually, the one thing I heard in the discussions and the questions back and forth that I think also might have some legs, and I'd like Greg to look at it if he might, is relative to some of the mayor's questions and comments. And Greg's already saying that with the stormwater issue and the, polluting it, there's potentially something there. I think it was you, Mark, who said, let them throw it, but if they don't get picked up, you're also responsible for coming back around and picking them up.
Right.
And if they don't, which obviously they probably would not, it's a little like, bad politicians who leave their campaign signs out long after the campaign's over. So, the city goes to the expense of going out and picking them all up and then sending a bill to whoever's responsible for putting it out there. And that's probably the way that it would go if you had an ordinance like that says you're responsible, you can throw them, but you're responsible for picking them up. Anything that lays in the street or the gutter or on the sidewalk or whatever, public right-of-way for more than X amount of days, they would ignore that. We pick it up, we send our public works people out there to do it, and then we send them a bill. And then we end up in court, and then after we win that case, they stop throwing their newspapers.
Interesting. All right, Greg, staff have what they need?
Yeah, I think so, and I'm sure as part of the process of developing the ordinance, I'll come across some other concepts that I think will meet the overriding goal of having an enforceable ordinance to meet this issue.
Can I just ask one more question? You mentioned something about San Francisco. I suppose you'll be looking at, what they're trying to do, because it seems that this sort of cries out for some sort of model ordinance that, lots of cities could adopt. I can't imagine that this is only a problem in San Carlos. It's obviously a problem everywhere.
Or actually, after you come up with your model ordinance, you can wrap it up in plastic bags and drop it on.
I will. I'm definitely interested in what San Francisco has in mind, as the problem there is magnified by about 20 from ours if they're getting the same number of deliveries.
Mark, just one more comment. Just think of the front cover of the League of Cities magazine. City of San Carlos model.
All right. Very good. Good discussion. Let's move on to 10A, new business. Consideration of receiving a report on a new downtown business improvement district. Adopting a resolution moving the $60,000 budget for business improvement district consulting services from fiscal year 2015-16 to fiscal year 2014-15 and authorizing staff to select a consultant to begin work on the formation of the district.
Just, Mr. Mayor, if I may, just briefly, and perhaps this is confusion on my part, but I thought we changed the order of the agenda earlier on.
Actually, I was doing it on a contingent basis.
Got it.
So
I'll make a note.
Yeah. Yes.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. My name is Edessa Bitbedel, Economic Development Coordinator. I'm here this evening to present to you a report on Business Improvement District. Request the City Council to move the Business Improvement District Consulting Services funding from fiscal year 2015-16 to fiscal year 2014-15 and authorize staff to hire a consultant. Additionally, I am available to answer any of your questions. In 2013-14, staff met with many downtown business owners through the Informal Business Outreach Program. During those visits, business owners were most concerned about cleanliness of downtown sidewalks, need for additional beautification projects, and focused marketing. Of course, additional items came up too, but most of the items that we heard were those three. The City Council's 6-month strategic objective from March 2014 through September 15, 2014, under a 3-year goal for enhanced economic development included develop and present to the City Council for direction on a potential new downtown business improvement district. In June of this year, City Council approved a 2-year budget that includes $60,000 of funding for business improvement district consulting services for fiscal year 2015 and 16. With that, staff proceeded to develop a request for proposal, and we issued the proposal, the RFP, in July. And that was done to better understand cost, availability, and interest for such services. I'm glad to tell you that the RFP was very well received. We have 5 experienced consultants who responded to the RFP. Business Improvement District is a defined area within which businesses pay an additional tax or levy to fund projects within the district's boundaries. Now, property-based improvement district is almost the same thing, but you're levying the property owners or the properties. So instead of businesses, you're taxing the property owners. P-bid or bid services could include cleaning streets, providing security, making capital improvements, construction of pedestrian streetscape enhancements, parking management and maintenance, marketing of the area, and beautification enhancements. And those are some of the services that can be provided through the Business Improvement District or Property-Based Improvement District. Now, during the request for proposal process, we had to create a map in order to ask consultants to respond. So we developed this map to include not only the civic center and the park, but also Transit Village in order to connect the civic center to El Camino to Transit Village and also, of course, our downtown core area. This map is not set in stone. It will be used by the consultant to solicit input from business owners and property owners, and it can be expanded or reduced in scope. Staff is recommending that the City Council accepts the P-bid or bid report, move the funding from fiscal year 2015-16 to fiscal year 2014-15, and authorize staff to hire a consultant. Based on the interest from several property and business owners in downtown San Carlos, it would be beneficial to move up the budget for consulting services. There are at least 3 reasons for this request. One, as I mentioned, first and foremost, a strong interest from businesses and property owners. Second, market forces. State of the economy would yield to a positive outcome now. If we wait for a year or two, economy may not be as positive as it is right now. And also assessment to take place before the Wheeler Plaza groundbreaking would be much more beneficial to the business owners and property owners if we're moving forward with assessment of the properties prior to development of Wheeler Plaza or before the project goes actually into construction. I know I went really quickly, but this concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your time. I'm here to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Odessa. Are there questions for staff? Bob.
Just a couple questions.
Sure.
The way your map is set up here, well, let me just ask a question. When and if this happens and you have a vote, it's a property owner vote. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's actually the most beneficial way of going.
Right, okay. Property owner has to be 50% plus one? Or, okay.
That's correct.
So I'm confused. So let's say I own an apartment building on Chestnut Street. Am I going to get a vote?
Yes.
So every property owner in your circle here. So,
Yes.
okay. So if I don't have a business, but I have a apartment building, okay?
That's correct.
What happens if I own a condominium in that area? So each condominium owner gets a vote? Each
Or-
single-family home gets a vote?
No, not family or property is based on the weight of the building, and the weight is going to be assessed by, it's based on the weight of the building. It's not based on number of buildings.
Okay, so I own a condominium at 777 Chestnut Street.
Sure.
Do I get a vote?
Yes,
But it's not one, it's a percentage of one?
it's a percentage, yes.
Of one. But I get a vote?
You get a vote.
Okay. So what interest do I have in a business district if I'm a homeowner?
And that's
And
exactly.
that's a rhetorical question.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why we're hiring a consultant during the first phase of the consulting services. The consultant is going to go out and talk to property owners and decide on the feasibility of the project itself, but also to develop a map if there is an interest to move forward with the project. So we really created the map to be able to submit or request a proposal from consultants.
Okay. Well,
It helped us with funding the
okay.
consulting services.
So you've got the circle past El Camino Real. You've got the transit village. So Samtrans owns all that stuff to some extent to the right of El Camino Real.
Yes.
Okay. So what's the percentage? Don't they have? It seems like they have a huge percentage of vote there.
At this point, that's what it looks like. The idea was to connect Transit Village to downtown.
I understand that, but I'm just asking the question.
Oh, absolutely.
Seems to me they have a huge percentage of the vote because they own a lot of the property there.
It could be, and really, it could change. It could go all the way to Britain. It could go all the way to Holly.
No, I understand.
City Hall.
I guess I'm not getting through to you though. Let me ask it again another way. I'm assuming that the way you have it drawn, they have a large percentage of what you have now. Is that right or is that wrong?
That's correct, yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. I don't.
Typically, through the process will identify certain types of uses that ultimately, before you enact this or move forward with it, you might exempt. For example, Redwood City recently did one that I'm sure you're aware of in their downtown. Well, as you know, in Redwood City's downtown, the county owns a lot of property.
Yeah.
And would actually almost be a controlling interest.
That's fine.
And
That's what I
so
was getting at.
ultimately they were, I believe, exempted from process in one form or another because obviously to the county, a business improvement district is not really...
Okay. Again, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but it would seem like that would be a similar situation that would come up. So that's what I was trying to understand. And I certainly understand that it's a movable, thing. I'm not saying we should or shouldn't. I'm just trying to understand the process. That's all.
a very valid point.
Okay, that's all. That's the only question I have.
Councilmember Grisilli, I just remember tonight it's on a budget item.
Right.
So I think.
But if I don't understand what it's about.
Oh, I get that. I'm just trying to not get beyond where we are
Correct.
now
No, I'm
to a
sorry,
project.
Mr. City Attorney. I'm just trying to get the answer. Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor. Matt.
You said about doing this before Wheeler Plaza, but you made sort of a declarative statement without any explanation. So if you could explain what's the reasoning to do this before Wheeler Plaza?
Well, as I mentioned, the number one reason is because of a lot of interest that we're getting from business and property owners. So that is really the driver of it.
Can you define a lot of interest?
Well, when I did the outreach with 70 businesses in downtown San Carlos, most business owners showed that they have a lot of need for extra cleaning.
Put a figure to that, like 60%, 70%, 50%? What's most?
I would say at least in terms of the need for services, it was considerable. I would say more than 50% wanted more services.
Okay, so they wanted more services, but did they want more services in saying, I could say I want more services, but I'm paying enough in property taxes and everything. I think it should come through what I'm paying. Or I want more services, and I'm confident the way to get that is to have a business district, and I want to have a business district.
And that's where the consultant comes in. The consultant will help us with the first phase of the program. The consultant will go out and interview and meet with property owners. And that's really what the first phase is trying to see if it's feasible, if it's going to be able to work in the city of San Carlos.
Okay, and then my last question is, very few of the Laurel Street, and, a lot of this is Laurel Street, right? And San Carlos Avenue too. Very few of those business owners own the property in which they do their business. In other words, they lease. So how do they play into this?
Should you move the budget for consulting services, the consultant will meet with property owners, and we're creating a map right now of list of property owners. We will figure, based on current map, which property owners he needs to outreach to, or beyond.
So what you're telling me, the answer to my question is the focus is on property owners, and if somebody's doing business on a property, in other words, leasing, it may be that their property owner is in favor of this, but they as a business may not be in favor of it. And we have no way of, if we go ahead with this RFP, whoever we hire, we don't have any way of telling them, look, we want to know also not just the property owners, but we want to know the leaseholders. What do they think about this?
Well, this will be driven by a team that will be comprised of most likely 2/3 property owners, 1/3 business owners. So business owners will have a say, and the team is going to be the driver of this initiative. It's not going to be the city.
I don't understand. You've thrown in a...
Eventually, as there is a need or interest in development of business improvement district or property improvement district, the consultant will form, let's say, property owners team or downtown team. And
what's the team going to do?
And that team will be comprised of property owners and business owners, and they're the ones who will be the drivers of this initiative.
Of a campaign.
Of the assessment district, yes.
But when it comes down to it, in the final say, when there's a vote, as Mr. Grisilli was talking about, it's a 50% plus one. It's weighted, similar to what we did on Industrial Road. And it's property owners who will vote. Leaseholders won't have a say.
That's correct. In terms of the legal process, only property owners would participate. In terms of the outreach process, in beginning to explore this and set it up, we would be outreaching through the chamber and with business owners. So they will have a voice in the process, but they would not have a vote in the actual assessment, which is a legally governed process.
Cameron.
How would the decision be made in terms of how the funds would be spent?
Well, once property owners, let's call it, if it is called a P-bid, once the property owners decide to assess themselves, they will have to form a 501c3. And that committee, there would be a committee to manage that 501c3, and that committee will make the decisions as to how to spend the funds.
Okay.
The assessment will go from the county to the city, and the city will give it to the 501c3 organization.
Mm-hmm.
And in other cities, chamber has a seat as part of that group. It's mostly property owners and some business owners.
I see. And do we have any ballpark estimate in terms of how much revenue will be available? Are we talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars on an annual basis that would be available for downtown projects?
We're not there yet, but our neighboring city is receiving close to $700,000 or $800,000.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much larger downtown. Comparing our size to theirs, I would say is probably 1/3 of that funding, if I'm comparing the property. We're looking into a substantial amount of money that can accumulate and develop real projects and lasting projects for downtown businesses and residents.
And one last question. For downtown projects that are paid out of the PBID. In other cities, is it typical that they're sort of self-directed in doing their own projects, or is it more that it's an additional source of revenue to augment, general fund expenditures? Maybe an analogy is, when we did Burton Park Phase 2, the city put in money, the Parks and Rec Foundation put in money to jointly do a project. Do you have a vision of how that would work?
As I understand it, it does not pay for basic services provided by the city. It's above and beyond what the city provides. For example, if the city is doing power washing 4 times a year, they can choose to have power washing 8 times a year. And again, I just use that as an example.
Right, that
exactly
makes sense.
what they will wish.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Des, I'm just curious, as sort of a similar to Bob's question, if we're calling this a business improvement district, why isn't it just Laurel Street or Laurel Street and El Camino? I mean, why would we expand this to anything but the downtown business core? Why would we even go out to the apartment buildings or any area beyond that? I guess maybe the consultant might be able to tell us that. That's my first question. My second one is that, and I think Matt asked it, was that about the business owners that are not property owners. Certainly, their wishes may be at odds with the business or the property owners themselves. So obviously, we want them included. And then the last question I have is, how much direction do we give to the consultants about the kinds of questions that we want answered?
Okay. If I can remember all your questions.
Well, we'll go back to the first one. Why not just confine the business improvement district to businesses?
So in the memo, if you notice, I included PBID/bid because exactly we're not so sure what the need of this community is, and that's what the consultant will do. With business improvement district, the assessment will go, will assess business owners. With property-based improvement district will be property owners. So that will be included as first phase of the project. I must say that historically, PBIDs, property-based improvement districts, are much more solid because property owners are being assessed rather than business owners. Business owners are not a solid source of income for such services. Again, that's something that I've been told as I've interviewed other cities and many, many consultants through the process. Mm-hmm. Your second question was?
Really, I think it was probably answered that what about the business owners that are not the property owners? I certainly want them included in the process.
Absolutely. And the feedback I had received was mostly from business owners. Business owners were the ones who were telling me, the 70 business owners I met with, they were telling me that they want more cleaning services. They wanted more beautification projects. Again, they're extremely happy with the current flower planting services we've had, and I've relayed that to Mr. Davis, but at the same time, they want it above and beyond of what we're receiving, and some other services that they're seeing in other cities. The consultant will come in, and the consultant and staff will coordinate our efforts, our outreach efforts, and we'll work with both businesses and property owners to get the exact feedback.
Okay. Last question: is $60,000 what they typically charge? Or are we trying to get? May you potentially come back to us and say, we needed 90, or is it going to be somewhat less than that? Is this sort of an estimate and sort of a padded estimate, and you might only need 45 or 50?
Well, I had contacted a lot of my colleagues from other cities, and that's how that number was created. And I'm glad to say that every one of the consultants who has applied, who has responded to our RFP, is at 60 or below.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Odessa. The question I wanted to ask you about sort of follows on what some of my colleagues have touched on already about the different perspectives between business owners and property owners. And when you were answering Ron's question, you talked about the overwhelming weight of the business people you spoke to who wanted additional services. It suddenly clicked for me, yes, of course, but they're not the ones paying fees because property owners will be paying fees. So there's the potential for difference of perspective there. But there's another potential difference of perspective that I'd like to understand what happens, what the experience is in other communities, which is if something like this gets set up, what happens if, I hesitate to say vision for the downtown because I'm not sure we would be colliding on that level. What happens if there's a difference of opinion between the city and the PBID on what ought to happen on Laurel Street? Like, hypothetically, we don't want the Festival of Lights anymore. We think it's the wrong thing to do, or we want festivals every weekend. Okay, and the city is like, maybe that's not such a good thing to do. So I'd be interested in how that kind of political management takes place and what the experience is in other locales.
So ultimately, the authority will always reside with the city council and the city over its own right-of-ways, streets, its sidewalks, its municipal code, and whatnot. So, the assessment district may envision paying for something or doing a project that the city disagrees with, and the city is going to prevail, essentially, in just about every case I can think of. So it doesn't really take away anything from the city. If there was a disagreement, then the city would still have a very strong position as it does today.
That makes sense, Jeff. It also sounds to me like in practice, this would be yet another, this would almost be like a neighborhood association in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very good way of thinking about it. This isn't the government. This is a group of people assessing themselves for their own benefit, either the benefit of owning property or the benefit of owning a business, or however ultimately it's structured.
I agree, and I think it can be, and by the way, I'm just trying to understand. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it at all, but think about all of the issues that we've all seen, not only in San Carlos, but in other communities, about interactions between governments and neighborhood groups. Mm-hmm. Okay, there is the potential for positive synergy. There's also the potential for significant friction, and to avoid the friction, it sounds to me, I guess what I'm coming down to, it sounds like there will have to be ongoing staff resources dedicated to working with the PBID, assuming one gets set up.
Absolutely. As really very much as there are ongoing resources dedicated to working with the Chamber of Commerce and the business community now. So it's really the same resources, just interacting almost with the same group of people, but through a different mechanism, and ultimately trying to leverage the resources that are available. And if we could just back up on the item a little bit, because we're really kind of getting into a lot of specifics tonight, and that's great. I know there's been a lot of enthusiasm on the council on this issue in the past, which quite frankly is one of the reasons why it's on our strategic plan and before you tonight. There are before this could become a reality, there are just a lot of steps that would happen and a lot of decisions ultimately that the city council would need to make in the future before this actually becomes a proposed assessment district and is put to a vote. So I mean, I certainly appreciate the initial feedback that we're getting from the council tonight, and I want you to be sure that if you do approve this expenditure, it's going to result in a lot more opportunities for you to weigh in the process as it moves forward.
Fair enough. We have one speaker card from Dave Bouchard on this topic. If anybody else wants to address the council, please fill out a card and turn it into Crystal.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. Just wanted to weigh in on this topic. The Chamber generally supports the concept of moving forward with the recommendation that's before you, moving this item up on the funding cycle for the city, and would stand ready to support it in any way that the city would ask us to be involved in this, in the formation of a property owners business improvement district. Just personally, I've worked and lived in a number of communities that have had downtown improvement districts similar to what you're talking about here, and they've worked very well. In many cases they'd been formed decades ago, so it's something that I think evolves over time. Just more recently, I've seen in a community where the city council and the the local business improvement district, the folks that were overseeing, the management of the improvement district, hammered out an ordinance that was dealing with an issue that some of the neighbors that were in the vicinity were concerned about. So some of those things do happen. They do occur, and they're dealt with at this level, basically. So, but again, just very supportive of the concept. I think, in light of the fact that the redevelopment agency has been dissolved, some of the funding that was dedicated to some of the projects that would occur downtown, went away with it. So this would be one additional tool that you would have, and those folks in that area would have to fund programs that would benefit them specifically. And I think, again, looking at who's involved in it, they would, have the opportunity to be directly involved in the decisions that are made that were directly impacting them as well. So I think it's has benefits on a number of levels, and again, very supportive of the concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Anybody else wish to address the council on this topic? All right, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion before we have discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to adopt resolution number 2014-90. 90. Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos moving the $60,000 budget for business improvement consulting services from fiscal year 2015-16 to fiscal year 2014-15 and authorizing staff to select a consultant to begin work on the formation of the district.
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I have a question to see if I heard this correctly and see how the other council members heard this. My understanding is if we go ahead with the RFP and that consultant comes in and starts working on this, ultimately the only participation that leaseholders have is advisory, if you will, to their landlords or whatever. But there's no way to set this up so that leaseholders have a vote in the district.
That's right.
Again, Mayor, may I? If it's a business improvement district, business owners will have a say. Again,
but only advisory. They don't get to vote.
no, they get to vote if it's a business improvement district. They assess themselves.
There's two different possible organizations that are being proposed, either a property business improvement district or a business improvement district, and it hasn't been decided, but it sounds like the staff is leaning towards the property side.
Is that correct?
That's correct. And we have already issued the RFP. We received 5 responses, so the next step will be selection of a consultant.
I'm a bit confused why staff is pushing a certain direction when we don't even have a consultant on board.
No, I don't think pushing is necessarily the right word. I think in the presentation we described what in our experience and our research shows that a property assessment district tends to be more stable in the long run because of the transient occupancy of certain businesses as opposed to property ownership. So I think we're trying to share that to you, but I don't think we've reached any final conclusions yet. We've certainly had a lot of outreach and involvement from the business community so far on this issue that would suggest that perhaps a business improvement district would be a good fit, but the same can be said on the property side as well. So I don't want to put forward the idea that we have prejudged this issue before we've gone through the process and met with all the folks that are out there.
So to my council members, as part of the discussion, I'm leaning towards voting against this, if for no other reason. I understand we get another bite at the apple and so forth, and we get to hash this out, but my vote is the only way I know to send a signal that I'm not 100% on board, I have concerns, and I don't want it in some staff report that, back in September, the council unanimously supported XYZ, and that gives the appearance that we're all on board and we think this is, great shakes. I don't think it's great shakes. I think it could be, and my biggest concern is this whole issue of leaseholders, because they're the ones running businesses day to day, and they're the ones that have the most at stake, I think, even more than a property owner.
Mr. Mayor, could I jump in on that? Matt, I understand your concerns, and I agree, because ultimately the business owners are the ones that make the city go, or makes the downtown viable. But what I think is happening here is we're looking for some guidance, and I guess consultants are going to tell us ultimately which way we ought to go. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
So, all right. So, given that, the other thing I think we need to keep in mind is that the property owners, they don't act independently of their tenants. If their tenants are sending them a message and saying you're headed in the wrong direction, or we don't agree with what you are thinking about, I think the property owners have to think long and hard about that, because they, the reason that they have tenants is because they've wanted to create a viable business enterprise, and if the business owner is successful, then he's going to pay his rent, and the property owner is going to be happy. I don't think by giving, reallocating the money and giving staff direction to pursue this, that we're really making a decision either way. And like I say, I get your concern, but I'm not sure that we have, ultimately the decision is ours. We can say, well, it's not the way that we wanted to go with it. But I don't have a problem at least finding out, and I don't have an opinion either way. I don't have enough information to make a decision. I may ultimately agree with you that it's giving too much control to the owners and not enough to the business owners. The people who pay the rents to the owners. So I'm thinking, I'm trying to put your mind at ease on this, but I totally get where you're coming from. But I think we need to find out what the consultant's going to tell us, and then we can move from there.
Mr. Mayor, my last word on that, and then I'll let us discuss and vote all you want. I understand to your comments, Ron. My concern a little bit is, for instance, if you read the article in the paper, and just the angle on it was, we're going this direction. And I could just see a business owner reading that and going, really? I haven't even had my say yet. So I'm not saying ultimately I'd vote against it, but like I said, this is the only way I know to send a message that there are concerns. Council has concerns, at least one council member does. I think this will pass. So I'm just using my vote as a, to show that it's not all 100%, and so that a business owner will read in the paper, hey, the council's not unanimous on this necessarily.
Okay.
So that's my point.
We respect
I would just like to, and again, people can vote how they wish. That's the beauty of democracy, and that's why there are 5 of us. But I think as Jeff was trying to frame or reframe the issue for us about 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, what we're really voting on tonight is accelerating spending money to go out and get a whole bunch of additional information and professional guidance on what the heck we ought to do here, not a particular implementation. And I think that probably got lost a little bit because of the nature of the presentation and the nature of the topic, and frankly, because this is a topic that we have all expressed interest in. So we all have a vision of what we'd like to see it be, and we're not there yet. And that's not what we're voting on tonight. Cameron.
I'll just make some brief comments to say I'm strongly in support of this. I think that our downtown Laurel Street is a huge asset to our city. It's a big differentiator from a lot of other places. It's one of the primary reasons that people come to our city. And we should be continuing to invest in it. It's not going to stay that way if we leave it as is. This is an opportunity for a classic win-win where business owners, property owners benefit from increased investment in downtown, which draws more people in, which increases their businesses, and then the city benefits because it's the creation of better and more beautiful public space and more business, which creates more tax revenue for the city. So I think it's a great idea. The other nice thing about it is it's voluntary. If the business/property owners choose not to do it, then that's okay. But if they want to, and it sounds like there's some interest for it, then that's great. And so I'm excited that we're doing this, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the consultant recommends.
All right.
Just one comment. I'm also looking very much forward to what the consultant recommends, because I could see gaming this system 6 ways to Sunday, depending on how you want to play it. So I'm going to be looking real hard at what the consultant comes back at, whether it's property or whether it's business, as you said, and what parts we're talking about, whether the condo owner, as I mentioned on Cherry Street, really cares, or whatever, even though it's a fractional vote, about how this is all going to go. So I think it's a great idea to spend the money and move it up and get the information. But like I said, I'm sure the rest of us, I'm not saying the rest of us wouldn't look at it, but I'm going to look at it real hard to see how he or she frames this thing and why they came up with those answers. Just like I didn't mean to press you because you're not the consultant, but I'll be pressing that consultant. And I want to know, and as I know the mayor sometimes has questioned methodology and how things are done, and sometimes I've rolled my eyes at that. But in this one, he's going to have to hit me because I'm going to be asking real hard questions on that one. So anyway, that's my only comment.
I promise not to hit you too hard.
Okay, thanks.
Crystal, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right, that brings us to item 10B, consideration of reviewing the scope of work prepared by TJKM Transportation Consultants to evaluate options for downtown parking strategies, directing staff to proceed with recommended options, and authorizing the city manager to augment the contract with TJKM in an amount not to exceed $97,693. And Jeff, I want you to know if it goes to $94, you're in trouble.
I'll make a note of that.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Lisa Porras, Principal Planner with the Planning Division. I would also like to introduce to you, following your direction this evening, our potential consultant for this project, Christopher Tenay. Christopher Tenay is a civil engineer with the firm TJKM, who assisted the city with a downtown parking study that you may all recall that was presented to you last September. Christopher also specializes in traffic engineering and is also a transportation planner. The recommendation before the council tonight is to review the scope of work that would be part of what we're referring to as Phase 2 of our downtown parking study that was launched last year. We're looking also to get direction from the council to proceed with the parking strategies that are going to be presented to you tonight so that we can move forward and start evaluating those and bringing those back to the council for further review. And then finally, because our contract with TJKM was only for Phase 1, which was to look at downtown parking inventory and parking occupancy data, to move forward with Phase 2, we would actually need to augment our existing professional services agreement with TJKM. So those comprise the three actions that we're looking to hear back from council this evening. And just before we get started, I wanted to provide a little bit of background for you. As you all know, in 1999, a downtown parking study was prepared for the city. It included parking inventory and presented some parking management strategies. However, that parking study only focused on the downtown core. So fast forward to 2012, there was movement by the City Council to conduct an updated downtown parking study given the existing conditions of downtown has changed. So what was done in 2013 is that study was updated, but it expanded the area of study. It included all of the area south of Laurel, the area east of downtown, which included areas around the Caltrain station, including some residential, the Greater East Side Residential District in its study, and a small area just to the north of San Carlos Avenue. That study was presented to the council last September, and some preliminary parking strategies were included in that report. As we move forward, we're now looking towards phase 2 and have worked with our consultant to expand upon some of the parking strategies that were presented in the 2013 report, and then to hear back from council that these are the strategies that you would actually like for us to go and evaluate and bring back. So implementation is not part of the scope of work at this time. That would be something that we would be further discussing with the council, but we do want to receive direction in terms of what types of strategies we should be looking at in this next phase. So some of the strategies that are presented in attachment 1 of your staff report are broken down into what are the short-term, midterm, and long-term parking strategies. For the short-term parking strategies, we're really talking about things that could be done very quickly within 1 to 2 years after evaluation. And this slide here represents the short-term parking strategies that we would be taking a look at. The first one is our current paid parking permit program, or our employee parking permit program. What we would be doing with this program is taking a look at potential locations for where paid parking permits, parking permit holders would be allowed to park. Currently, you see these parking locations in any one of the city lots. So as part of this short-term strategy, we would be evaluating other locations, such as potentially Wheeler Plaza, maybe taking a look at some of the private parking lots, and looking at opportunities for shared use. The other strategy that we would need to take a look at, or that is due for reevaluation, is taking a look at our current in-lieu parking fee. There is a resolution that has been adopted by the council to set the fee, and there is language that the fee is adjusted regularly, but it needs quite a bit of evaluation to determine what the appropriate in-lieu parking fee should be today. The other thing that we wanted to take a look at is establishing what would be called a one-day premier parking permit. This is where someone can purchase a parking permit and park in certain locations throughout the downtown and have a tag on display, and they wouldn't need to worry about moving their vehicle. So this would be something new that we could take a look at, and all of these are relatively easy to implement on a short-term basis. The midterm parking strategies would take a little bit longer to implement. Those are parking strategies that would be done anywhere between 3 and 5 years. One of the items that we do want to take a look at is utilizing the smart technology that is available. As most folks are aware of, we currently have StreetLine in our downtown, and we have the Parker application available for those who know about it, so they can easily see where parking might be available. But we're looking at using smart technology to expand some of that data in facilities such as the new Wheeler Plaza parking garage. The other thing that we wanted to take a look at was wayfinding, or better signage. And by having better signage, this would increase accessibility and increase the efficiency of drivers in order for them to quickly and easily figure out where parking is located. And it also is good for our climate because it reduces vehicle circulation, people circulating in certain areas that, maybe they're going the wrong way, or they're not quite sure where another parking lot might be located. The midterm strategy, another midterm strategy, is looking at a potential opportunity area that was identified in the 2013 downtown parking study, which is additional public parking over off of Laurel Street in the area near Belmont Avenue. Actually, it's off of El Camino Real, but there's an unpaved Caltrain area that was identified in the 2013 parking study that we would like to explore more and see if there's possibility where that area could serve as public parking. Strategies that we want to employ are not only directly related to vehicles, but we also want to look at reducing parking demand philosophically. And this could be done by improving some pedestrian and bicycle accessibility in and around the downtown. One of the things that we do want to take a look at is bike share programs. And I'm sure you've seen these in many cities. More and more cities are starting to offer bicycles that are available. You kind of rent them out and then you park them in other locations where the next user can hop on a bike and take care of their errands or travel needs. We also want to take a look at ways that would increase our existing parking capacity. This could involve taking a look at the parking striping in our existing parking lots and seeing if there's a way to maximize parking in those particular areas. And we also want to take a look at shared parking in private lots. One good example of these would be a lot of the banks in downtown have their own parking, and certainly during post-business hours, there's opportunities to take a look at some of those private lots and see if there might be some agreement or interest in having those spaces be used by the public. And I think there was a member of the community who spoke during public comment about that very idea. And then finally, the long-term parking strategies would cover 5 to 7 years out after they're evaluated to see if they can actually be implemented. And one of them is to look at our current parking assessment district. Our current parking assessment district covers a very focused area in the downtown core. It kind of wraps around maybe 1 or 1.5 blocks. And one of the things that we would like to take a look at is to redefine this boundary and possibly expand it, because by doing so, the collection of parking in lieu fees, the opportunity for the collection of parking in lieu fees is expanded, which then could augment the city's existing parking fund. We also want to take a look at residential parking benefit districts. This is where people who live in a certain residential neighborhood would receive parking passes where they can, put on their car and leave their cars there all day long. And for everyone else, they would be, limited to a certain number of hours or potentially not at all. So that's an idea that we want to further explore. And this is in light of some of the concerns that we have received over parking spillover effects into the residential neighborhoods surrounding the downtown. And then probably no surprise is that we really want to take a close look at the potential for future parking garages. We want to evaluate potential sites, not just in the downtown core, but also south of Laurel as well. So pending your direction tonight, the next steps would be augmenting our existing contract with TJKM to complete Phase 2. We would then begin evaluating the strategies that I just presented, and again, all of these are listed in Attachment 1 of the staff report. We would also utilize the council parking subcommittee that was previously established during Phase 1 and meet with the committee to hear their feedback during the evaluation process of all of these strategies. We would then prepare a report, present it before the Transportation and Circulation Commission to get their recommendations, likewise with the Planning Commission, and then ultimately come back to the City Council and present to you much greater detail about the parking strategies, their feasibility, how, what their costs might be in terms of, and also look at phasing and timing and how they might be implemented. And then the Council will give further direction at a future point in time so that we could begin perhaps implementing some of these strategies that we've just studied. That concludes my presentation. Both myself and Christopher Thanay are available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll do questions for staff, and since this is also a topic that we have discussed in great depth before and people have lots of interesting ideas on it, let's try and remember to stay focused on questions during this phase, and we'll have the discussions later. Cameron.
Hi, Lisa. One question about the order of the presentation. Are you're looking for feedback on strategies prior to the consultant doing their study, or you want the consultant to do their study present strategies and then get feedback on the recommendations?
We're actually looking for council to concur with our proposed strategies that we are going to evaluate. We've come up with a list, of course, as I just mentioned, the short, midterm, and long term, and we want to make sure that nothing's left out, that you agree that all of these strategies should be the ones the city should focus its efforts towards. I mean, maybe there's some things on the list that, maybe the council might not want to focus on, for example, or there may be other strategies that you want us to take a look at. So before we go and begin the work, we just want to make sure that our list of things to evaluate is complete and supported by the council.
Do you feel like you need this study? I know that, government usually moves at a very slow pace, but a lot of these things I think are well understood as far as I can tell talking to staff in terms of, the parking problem that we have at Peak. I noted here from the proposal that the draft report would be August 11th, so a year from now, for $90,000. And I'm just concerned that, we're essentially telling ourselves, we're waiting a year to tell ourselves things we already know. So I guess I'm asking as a planner, are there things that you don't know? And if so, can you give me some examples of where you think this would be very effective in helping to solve the parking shortage?
Sure. I'd first like to clarify that is a typo in the attachment, the August date. So just to kind of get a sense of the timing of this project, we're going to look at evaluating the strategies from October to December, roughly, meet with the parking subcommittee 2 times between December and January, prepare the report in about February, and then make it back to council by May. So between February and May, we'd be meeting with the Transportation and Circulation Commission and Planning Commission, get to council by May. So that's a much better time frame than the...
That helps, but I guess the rest of the question still stands. I mean, I think, do you feel like there's information that you don't know, and can you give some examples of where you really think this money would be well spent in terms of improving our knowledge of what is essentially a capacity problem? If there are more cars looking for parking spots than there are parking spots available.
Yeah. Well, as we look at each of these strategies, there has to be some geographical boundaries attached to them, one of them being the residential parking benefit district that we would look at. So we need to put a little bit more analysis into them. I think they're on the surface, I would agree with you that these seem pretty less intense. I mean, there's some good strategies in there, especially for parking garages, but a lot of them can be easily implemented and not require, I think they're the low-hanging fruit, but maybe if I could have our consultant maybe touch base on, why we need to further expand our study on each of the strategies rather than just saying, here's a strategy, let's go forward and implement it. We want to provide a little bit more of some boundaries around those to make it clear where they're implemented, how they're going to be implemented. And I know certainly we haven't had an opportunity to take a close look at some of the sites south of Laurel for potential locations of parking garages. So I don't know if, Chris, you have anything else to add to that, maybe? Yeah, I think the mic is on.
Good evening, council members. Chris Bethany. I'd like to also actually clarify, this phase of the work is not 92,000 actually. It's
35.
32.
I see.
Yeah. So, I'll give you the background. The first phase of the study, we have concluded basically the city has about 2,217 parking slots. 53% kind of private lot. And of the private lots, we have about average occupancy about 65%, whereas the public lots on street, we have about probably 75%, and off street 85% occupied. So what is second phase, in terms of short term, mid term, and long term, is to essentially, for example, for the short term, come up with very concrete ideas so that we can take a look more specifically, for example, where does the parking permit of the 91 stalls that we have currently, where could it be better assigned in order to free up some of the spaces, perhaps, so that businesses could better utilize them instead of being occupied by permits. Because permits you park whole day, if it's at the wrong spot, prime spot for businesses might not be the best place to have them. Maybe you can move them out. But employee parking, perhaps, further out to the Caltrain parking garages. So those are kind of like the short term. And then also in terms of in lieu parking, many cities, I used to work in Palo Alto as traffic engineer there, where there's in lieu parking, and now they are even looking at other things. So we need to look at essentially several.
Sorry to interrupt you, but in lieu parking doesn't create additional parking. It's just a fee it creates revenue.
It is.
Is that right?
Right. It is. But what I was trying to allude to is that we're not just looking at creating more parking supply. We're also looking at how do you reduce the demand. That's where we come in with how to find ways to make biking, walking, more attractive. So the midterm, in terms of once we still talk about the low-hanging fruits, the more midterm, where we can better utilize, for example, existing technology. For example, I know that wayfinding signs is a great help in many cities. For example, if you drive into Laurel Street, we like to know exactly, where are the parking spots? And if you increase a higher level in terms of smart parking, once you drive in, perhaps, right away in terms of this digital age, we'll be able to display to say, this Wheeler lot is fully occupied. It's occupied 95% of the time anyway, according to past survey, so that people doesn't need to keep circling around and creating more congestion. So those are some of the things that we like to put concretely, say, this is what you can do next. And then the longer term, in terms of 5-7 years out, is that we like to really zero in a little more to see realistically what parking garages land you sort of site-wise or that, and also in terms of serving the demand, the downtown area or that, what's that, So, in terms of short-term, mid-term, and long-term, those are the strategies we like to really come in and take the phase one and really put it in concrete steps so that staff could really take it to the council and then maybe better ideas, and then we implement it.
Okay. I'll let others take some time. I'll save some comments for later.
Other questions?
Thank you.
One question I have is, you've given us a laundry list. I'm not sure what liberty we have. I know we're the council, but still, of taking things out or putting things in, and what impact that has to the initial 35,000 whatever change number that we're dealing with.
May I? Yeah. I think basically, unless yes, the big objections on this list, this is by no means totally comprehensive. For example, the meeting with stakeholders, or that as we present some of the.
Actually, let me interrupt. Sorry, let me interrupt. I think it might be easier, Matt, if you have something you want to ask. Could this be included? What would it cost? I think that's what you were getting at. You have some ideas you wanted to suggest, and you want to get a sense of what the cost impact was.
Right. Should I just shoot those out there? And
yeah, why don't you shoot them out? I mean, again, in the context of cost, and then we'll come back to whether we're actually going to include them.
Okay.
Discussion.
And I'll include the one that that I have no interest in, and I think the council showed it at our last council retreat, and that's the bike share program. I mean, that came up. Christine Bolin brought it up, and we shot it down. So I don't know why it's in here. But some of the areas that I would question whether we could look at, and I don't know how it would impact the budget, or if it's a long-term, mid-term, or long-term goal. But there's been some interest, at least from one restaurant, about having spaces available for delivery and pickup. So something that's like a 10-minute green zone, and that would only apply at certain times of day, usually in the evening, where, especially with pizza places where they want a space close by where customers can, park, get their pizza or whatever it is, and then leave. I don't know if there would be any value. Cameron was asking about even the value of the whole thing here, including in the study about U-turn abuse, and if we had those numbers and knew what that looked like, if there's any benefit to knowing that data or not. I know you see it a lot. If you spend time, even in an hour's time at a coffee shop downtown, you see 3 or 4 vehicles doing U-turns. This morning I saw a delivery truck do a U-turn. What's our inventory of handicap spaces? Do we have enough? Do we not? Do we have too many? I don't know if, there's a code limit, I'm sure, on how many we have to have, but is that enough, or is it, and also in that category, the abuse of people using handicap spaces that ought not to be using them. And then the last one is data on motorcycle parking. You talked about bicycles and pedestrians. There's also, a lot of folks that use motorbikes. Sometimes you see a motorbike parked in a car space, if you will. Total waste if you're driving a car and looking for a space. So those are just some things that I don't know if we can add those in, take them out, whatever. But
Could those be added into the study without significantly changing the cost? If the council were to direct to do that?
Well, I think one of the things with respect to your U-turns, I'm hearing that wouldn't, well, that's not really part of the parking study. That could be handled, perhaps under a different matter with the circulation downtown and maybe some, just more attention to how people are currently utilizing the downtown and responding to the stop signs and circulating throughout the downtown. The inventory of handicap spaces, I believe we have from our 2013 parking study, so we do have information on that. And motorcycle parking did come up when we met with...
I'm sorry. Oh. So we have data on how many we have, but my other part of that was the demand. And, and the reason I bring up the idea of abuse, like U-turns and using handicap placards when you shouldn't and so forth, I don't know, you tell me. It seems to me, anyways, that it indicates something about your overall parking, inventory, and do you have enough, and when don't you have enough? When do you see these abuses? Doesn't that show that? You see what I'm saying?
If I may interrupt.
Yeah.
On the other hand, as you and I know from being on the parking subcommittee, we are close to being in a situation that's not good. And there are some times when we are definitely way over the threshold of not good. So I would ask the question about, is that worth the additional data to get that? Because I think we already do that. Now, the inventory, the question you asked about, to me, the question you asked is, do we have enough handicap spaces? That would be an interesting thing to find out. Not the abuse side, but do we have enough? I don't know.
Sorry to interrupt you, Lisa, but go ahead. There was one more, the motorcycle.
The motorcycle parking, right. We had heard about that during the 2013 downtown parking study. So as an example, we could look at opportunities for restriping certain areas in the lots that we currently have. We can take a look at our existing inventory and see where there's opportunities to provide the motorcycle parking. And I think that's already built into it. For each one of these strategies, there's, what's not in your attachment is a thorough description of what goes into it, but that would be something that we would be taking a look at, is the motorcycle parking.
Versus demand at all? I mean, is there a way to look at that?
The motorcycle parking demand?
Yeah, we might have. I can go back and look at the occupancy, that we done before.
So it sounds like if the council were to choose to do that, some of those things we could do, we could ask to have directed to be included in the study.
We could look into that, and I think those are pretty minor. If Chris is nodding, yes. Okay. And certainly if the bike share has already been decided, then that's one we can remove.
Other questions?
I just had one on the bike share. I wasn't aware that we had dismissed that as an option.
We did at the council retreat. It came up. It was on our strategy list, and it got taken off.
All right, so that probably doesn't belong on here?
If that's a decision that has been made by council, we can update the scope to reflect council's previous decision to not look at bike share programs.
Okay. And the only reason I ask is that if it was going to be or is going to be included, and it sounds to me like it isn't, my question would have been, why not put them at the train station? But maybe that's something that we can take up with Legacy on that project. So.
The other thing, maybe just to reiterate, is these are strategies that we're going to evaluate and study. None of these wouldn't be implemented. These would all be brought back to the council in a report, and then the council could take, decision at some point in the future once that report's done, and make a decision on which one of these strategies we should be implementing. Maybe many of them, maybe some of them, but based upon the findings of the report. So we could still study it if that's the direction of the council.
Well, sounds like there's not a lot of support.
Other questions? Okay, thank you. I don't think we have any cards on this particular topic. Is there anybody who wishes to address the council on this? Gino, how about you? Okay. All right. I will entertain a motion.
All right. Mr. Mayor, I will move that we direct staff to proceed with recommended options and authorize the city manager to augment the contract with TJKM in an amount not to exceed $97,693. Is that correct?
Already spent 62.
I thought the report said something about 32,000.
We've already spent 62,000 of it.
All right.
Yes.
All right. So the total is 97.
Total.
Okay.
Mr. Collins, your motion was as presented, but we talked about striking the bike share.
Oh, all right.
As directed by council.
As direct, yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Second.
All right, motion and a second. Discussion.
Just a brief comment. So I think this is a very important issue for our city. It's an issue which I hear about a lot. It was an issue that was reflected in the citizen survey, and I think planning is good. I'm glad to hear that it's not going to take a year for the report. I think that was my initial reaction to it. But I think that the public expects us to move faster. I think that the fact that the economy is growing faster, I think we're only going to have a bigger problem. I think saying things like, signage is a 3 to 5 year time horizon to me is frustrating. I would like to see things move as quickly as possible. And so I'm going to support this. But I guess the last thing is I'm a little frustrated when I said, do you need this, Lisa? Like, I'm expecting an answer about why you need it. And you kind of deferred to the consultant to say, why do we need to do this? Well, he certainly wants to do it. So I just want to hear if staff is hiring outside consultants, which we do constantly, it makes a lot of sense. I just want to hear why we're doing it and why you need it, because I think in my mind, this is just me, and I don't want to prejudge the outcome too much, but maybe I'll do it a little bit to say that I think most of these strategies, thank you, are marginal at best. I think that this is largely a capacity problem, and we could spend a tremendous amount of time discussing and brainstorming and analyzing things that are not going to have much more than 5% impact on the margins. And if it is indeed a capacity problem, I'd like to move forward with figuring out what the solutions are. So, but I'm happy to support the additional work. So.
I'm sorry, Mark. I had one more question, if I may. You mentioned the timing of this, and it brought forth the idea of, the best time. If you're a fisherman, you want to go fishing the best time that the fish are biting. And in terms of parking studies, I would think you want to do a study when we're talking about capacity at the time it's most prevalent as a problem. And, for instance, you think of the holiday season, people shopping and so forth, that's going to skew your numbers. Maybe that's what you want, but I don't know. Are we okay on the timing? And if Chris has given any consideration to getting out there when we're going to have the most impact? I see Al getting up.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Al Savay, Community Development Director, and I'd like to answer Councilmember Grocot's question and then go back to Councilmember Johnson's points as well. But we know where the problems are. We have the data, so we really don't need any more data.
Okay.
I think we know that we have. We're on the verge of having a more serious problem. Right now, it's a problem that most people talk about. Generally, you're able to find a parking in downtown, but people are somewhat frustrated. We know that, and we know the numbers. We've done the studies, and now what we're trying to do is come up with the solutions on how to solve the problems we know that we already have based on the data.
So season
and to bridge into Councilmember Johnson's concerns and frustrations. Part of it is, I think, eventually it would be great to have another garage in the downtown, but we need to be able to bridge the gap between the years it'll take to finance a parking garage and find the right location, acquire the properties. And so those 5 and 10% increments that we're going to get over the next few years will keep the level of frustration down in the community, I think. I think that you will see a very real improvement in parking if we implement several of these measures at the same time. And what we want to do with this study is come to you and say, hey, here's what we think we need to do now. Here's how much it'll cost. Here's how much staff time it'll take. And here's how much of an impact it'll have on the community. And so we really do need this assistance from the consultant. We simply don't have the resources on the city staff, and also from best practices in other cities. We can look at where other cities have failed and where they have performed well in this arena. And so that's why we need this study, and hopefully I've helped to clarify.
Thanks, Al. Just one brief comment, which is to say I would love to see, I think a lot of that mix of strategies that you're talking about is in that midterm time horizon, which Lisa characterized as 3 to 5 years. I'd love to see if there are things that won't take 3 years that could have a meaningful impact on parking in downtown.
Yes, and I would agree 100%. And I think, as you mentioned, signage is something I think the city should do right away.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
They're actually, I think the comments I was going to make is echoing part of what Cameron was saying. There's sort of two different philosophies here, and government tends to follow the one of study things very carefully before you make a move, because, as we all know, there's almost no move the government can make that somebody's not going to object to. So we're looking to minimize the objections. However, I think in this particular instance, because the problem is pretty well known, my biggest concern about the study plan is that structuring things by short, medium, and long term, when I went through the list, it really depends on the specific details of the problem you're trying to address. I'll give you an example. As I recall from the parking study data and from the complaints that we all get from residents, there is a particular fairly hot issue on the south end of Laurel Street with spillover parking into residential neighborhoods. Okay? It's in fact at a level where I would argue that ain't a medium or long-term thing. That's do something, think about whether you can do something now. Okay? And now doesn't mean tomorrow morning, because that's a neighborhood parking program and you have to work through the ramifications of it. So to me, neighborhood parking program for south end of Laurel is probably a short-term thing. When we went through the transit village discussion, we identified, I will loosely call it kind of as a medium-term thing, saying that we might have to implement something like that there once the transit village is built, if there is a problem with spillover. So you see, it depends on the situation, depends on the exact context. It's not it's not just short, medium, long. It's what is the particular problem? How imminent is it? Okay. And the signage too, I think is a great example. I mean, to me, and I have no idea how expensive signs are. So if they're very expensive, then they would need to be studied. But I'm visualizing it's like, hey, if you think it's going to help, do it tomorrow. Right. Okay. I mean, why not? Right? What's the downside? So I fully support this, because I do know that there are issues that we have to study and think about, even like the neighborhood parking program example I used. We have to think about how we're going to roll it out. We have to talk to some of the people, make sure that they understand and we understand what the trade-offs are. But, let's have a bias for action on some of this stuff too. I fully support doing this to get staff whatever they want to do to solve the problem, but what I really want to do is start solving some of these problems.
Right.
So, and I'm happy to go bolt signs up if that.
I'm with you.
Any other comments? All right. With that, Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right. Next, we are going to move to consideration of receiving a presentation on the proposed 2015 solid waste rates and providing direction to staff and the council SBWMA board member, otherwise known as me. Jay, something tells me that you're lead on this.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Allow me a moment to bring up the presentation, and I'll try to work through that fairly quickly. I know we're concerned about time, at least to be able to get you this information. So tonight, Mr. Mayor, council members, we'll kind of begin the discussion for the solid waste rates for 2015. And at least in part, the reason that we're doing that is because the SBWMA board will be meeting this month to discuss the revenue requirements that are needed for 2015. And as Mayor Olbert has identified, he is our board member and had asked for the opportunity for council to give him some advice and direction for that meeting. And we felt also it was a good opportunity to give you kind of a heads up as to what 2015 is shaping up to look like. So again, for tonight, we'll talk about the rate setting process briefly. We'll talk about what the outlook is for 2015 at this point, and then touch on just a few additional topics if you feel like we want to get into those now. The other thing to remember is that we have on October 13th, we come back to council with what would be the first meeting for the city council to consider the potential opportunities for rates in 2015. So we may talk about a rate stabilization fund, the possibility of that, the continuing saga of residential cart rate alignment, as we started with last year and a couple of years previous, the idea for low-income residents to have some potential rate options that are lower than the normal rates, and the issue of commercial rates, with which we have a consultant studying right now. So again, a little bit about the process. So Recology, our trash hauler, and South Bay Recycling, who handles the material over at the Shoreway facility, they have submitted rate applications and information to the SBWMA board for their consideration. And the staff has been evaluating that, going back and forth with them with comments and revisions and everything else. And the SBWMA board is getting ready to review and approve those revenue requirements. And the member agencies will then sort of start the time clock to set their own rates, which will be effective in 2015. So where we are now is, again, just about ready for the SBWMA board to meet. So a little snapshot for 2015 as we go into this. As the council knows, essentially in any given year, there is a combination of years which are either yet to come, partially finished, and may be completely reconciled, or may not be completely reconciled from previous years with rates and revenue and all that. And so as we look at 2015, we're looking at 2015 right now. There's an estimated surplus. That is, the rates that are currently in force for 2014 will result in more money than we need to make the revenue requirement in 2015. So that's a good thing. In 2014, the current year that we're in right now, we're looking at the potential for a surplus of about $112,000, but the year's not finished yet, so we can't say that's an exact number, but we're still looking good in that regard. But going back to 2013, they're showing now in that the final accounting of that is a $106,000 shortfall, which has to be taken care of. And then back 2012, the actual surplus, again, is available now with a total estimated amount for 2015 to be about $459,000. That means, based on the snapshot we've got right now, we would be looking at a surplus over the revenue that's required in 2015. But again, remembering these are all estimates, or most all estimates, But it's looking pretty good for 2015 right now based on the revenue requirements that we see and the rates we currently have charged. And just to give you a little history, San Carlos rates, this has the last 5 years. And again, this information actually has been provided to us by our SBWMA staff, and Marshall Moran, their finance manager's here in the audience tonight, and Kevin McCarthy is here as well. So they'll be able to answer questions later if the council has them about these particular figures. But you can see that in the last 5 years, we've come out of some pretty deep shortfalls with high percentage rate increases for trash rates to the last couple of years, or the last year and the upcoming year, which look to be pretty reasonable for our residents. That is, the revenue that is required is within the amounts that we're collecting. So that's a pretty good look forward, and this history looking back too. Residential cart rate alignment, again, as the council would remember, we have an issue where the cost for the contractor to pick up and service the various different cart sizes for our residential customers is different than what the current rates are. And as you can see on the far right column, you can see that there is a big difference in the 20-gallon container. That is, the rate doesn't cover the cost of that cart actually being serviced. But on the other end of the spectrum, the largest carts, you could see that the current rate per month well covers the actual cost to service that cart. So we had talked last year about the idea that we might move towards some equity in these areas where there wouldn't appear to be quite such a subsidy from the large carts to the small carts. So that's something that council can consider and give us direction on for this fall as we go into the rate setting time frame. The idea of a rate stabilization fund, again, keeping in mind that the majority of the projected surplus is estimated. The council can consider a rate stabilization fund going forward as a way to potentially stave off future rate increases by having a little bit of money in the bank. It certainly can be a big help. So council options going forward, again, not for discussion or decision tonight, but as we look at this 2015 forecast, you have the option, if you wanted to decrease rates in 2015 by up to 5.7%. You could leave the rates as they are and consider by waiting out the year what you might be able to do with that surplus over the course of the year. And if you set up a rate stabilization fund, it may be a way to offset some of those future cost increases. And I think the inevitability is that the rates will likely go up in future years. We've had a couple of good years where rates can stay the same, but they are likely to go up as we know inflation and other factors that enter into that. So we have to be, council would need to be very careful as far as making a decision on this this fall. So tonight we're looking for the council to give direction to Board Member Olbert for his meeting coming up in September. If you have ideas or concerns or questions, and then if you've got any ideas that you want to share for me as we prepare for our own rate discussions to start in October, be glad to take notes of those and then be able to bring those back in October when we have that meeting with council. So again, on the screen is the next steps in the process for the city. We'll be having our meeting in October, and we'll want to, if the council is going to raise rates, we're going to need to be ready by October 23rd to schedule the Prop 218 hearing, which would be on December 8th. And then we would go forward with rates that would be effective in January of 2015.
Thank you, Jay. Before we actually open it up for questions, as Jay mentioned, both Jay and I are interested in whatever questions the dais may have for the SBWMA discussion, plus our own internal discussions. I personally find it helpful to look at this in sort of two ways. We set our rates that basically raise the revenue that we turn around and pay to SBWMA.
To recall, yes.
Through Recology, effectively. I'm simplifying it.
Right.
To try and keep people from going insane. But at the same time, behind the scenes, there are issues that drive costs at Recology and SBWMA that we have to cover. So the two things are independent. It's like revenues versus costs in the business. The primary direction, other than questions, that I'm actually looking for is not actually on the items that are in the presentation that Jay has put together, which, again, I think is great to have this in advance of our discussions in October. But it's in looking at the more in-depth material that was in the written report. Are there questions that you want to make sure get answered at the SBWMA level? In other words, about the costs of the operation. We separately set our rates, independent of costs, with the goal of covering the costs. But they are two separate things. So with that as a preamble, questions for staff?
Well, I get it. I always have a million questions on this. Jay, I'm a little confused on your rate stabilization fund screen. You say total dollar amount of surplus that is final is less than 6% of total revenue estimate. Okay. What does that mean?
And that relates to the 5.7%, and that's actually, it's not listed here in the presentation, but it's in the staff report. That's the percentage, that 5.7%, which is the amounts to the $459,000 that we look as a surplus in 2015.
Right, but we know we have actual. That's where I get confused. It says we know there's two parts of that screen that we know are actual. The negative 106 and the positive 214, right? Mm-hmm. You take the net, it's 108. 108 over 459 is 24%. So I'm confused. But the 459 obviously isn't the same as what you're talking about here with the 6%. It has no relationship to it, I guess.
The 459 is the 5.7%.
Okay, let me rephrase it.
Yeah.
Let me again, as I said, you take the negative 106, add the 214 positive, you get a number of about 108. If you take that and divide it by 459, it's 24%. We know that 24%. Or do we? It says actual.
The numbers that are on that chart,
not the first two, just the last two.
They all four add up to the 459.
Right.
And
so I'm not following the 24%. Again, this is estimated surplus.
I'm just trying to identify the 6%, Jay. Where does that number come from? 6% of what?
It's 6% of the, Jay, isn't it roughly $8 million cost?
It's one of the attachments that's in your staff report, and yes, that is actually the case.
I apologize I didn't read through 9,000 lines of this stuff, and I apologize because this has got more lines on it than I have here, okay? And I apologize. I'm just trying to identify the answer to the question. 6% of what? Or where does the 6% come from?
Of the total...
Of $8 million?
Yes.
So 6% of $8 million is 459. Is that what we're talking about?
I think that's right.
But that's not actual, so that's...
It is the current best estimate of what the surplus is. And you are...
Okay. All right. I get it. I got it.
You know, the council could, for example, choose to be very conservative and say, we want to ignore the 2014 and 2015 surpluses until they've mellowed.
I understand. Okay. I got 6% of $8 million. I got it. Okay. I got it. Thank you. Just trying to understand the numbers.
Other questions?
Although we want to do a study session here, so I don't really understand why we're even talking about any details or why I should even ask that question. Because the alternative is to recommend hold a study session to talk about this in more detail. So I'm a little confused, but I'm always confused.
I have just one question. It says under council options, set up a rate stabilization fund. So where is that money held, and does it earn interest, or does it? What happened? What's the machinations of setting up this fund?
That money can be held by the city, and it would earn interest. So it's an amount that is it sort of floats through the year. Again, because this is an estimated surplus, it's not an exact amount that we'd hold all that time.
Where do we get it from? Because
essentially it's over collection.
Yeah, but those guys collect the money, don't they? So we're obligating them to send it to us?
Let's see where it is right here.
Okay. I'll ask Marshall to come up and address that and how the rate stabilization funds have been set up in some of the other cities in the agency at this point.
Good afternoon. Marshall Moran, Finance Manager, South Bay Recycling. South Bayside Waste Management Authority. Sorry. So we're estimating that the city will have $459,000 surplus money, and we're suggesting as other cities have done, that you might want to take some of that money, say 200,000 or whatever you decide, take it into the city, set it aside, and use it as a rainy day fund in case, to anticipate any future rate shocks or issues. So it would be taken sort of out of the system and held for the ratepayers for future use.
So if we were to do that, why wouldn't we take all of the estimate?
You can take any amount you want.
459.
But
okay, we could take any amount. All right.
Yes.
So
the way, if I may interject, the issue when Bob and I were talking before, and he was focusing on the two oldest numbers, is, think of it this way, the process that, and I'm going to say SVWMA, the process that goes through with the people who send us the bill is that they are, for a number of years, continually readjusting the numbers.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
What actually comes in.
An analysis. So one could say, oh, I've got a $460,000 surplus, and then you lower your rates to account for that, and then you find out next year, oh, it actually was only $400,000. So we undercollected $60,000, and now we have to raise rates $60,000.
Yeah.
So that's the bet that you're making, okay? But it is a choice that you have as to how much of the estimated surplus do you want to bleed through or use or put in a rate stabilization fund or what.
However, question then, let's say you take and you set aside $469,000, and to use your example, after all the accounting's done and the auditing and everything, you actually only have a surplus of $400,000. But you got $469 sitting in your account over here at City Hall earning interest. So how do we make right with SBWMA at that point?
We would owe them additional money the following year.
But we would just take it out of our holdings and send it back to them, right? We'd say, okay, we held $69,000 too much. Here's the money. Here's the interest we earned on it. Have a good day.
I think if I understood you correctly, Matt, I think what you just described is the operation of a rate stabilization fund.
Okay.
So, and that's why people do that.
Okay.
Is to smooth things out.
Mark,
yes.
What do you have to do on September 25th?
On September 25th, we are essentially, the SBWMA board is approving I think that is approving the costs that Recology and SBR are going to be charging into the system, of which we get our $8 million bill. Okay, so my concern had always been that not having discussion and the opportunity for guidance before that vote, I effectively am setting the rates. In other words, you guys can say, well, we have to cover our costs, but Mark already decided what our costs were by voting a certain way. Okay. Now, the caveat on that is the way the contract operates, as you know, is almost all the costs are indexed. So there's very little volatility in it.
Right.
From year to year. But still, from a procedural point of view, it's better to...
Through the chair, there's no information for us to even make any kind of a question because there's no information about, as Mr. Grocott just mentioned, in here to talk us about expenses. So how can we give you the direction? What was in here that we could...
I guess what I was reading in here, Bob, was in the various attachments.
What attachments?
You know, the attachments on this here, but I don't...
I was looking at the electronic version.
Well, I think we should cut Gino's salary, and cut Kevin's salary, and cut this gentleman's salary, and okay, I'm good.
Well, let me ask you, Mark.
I apologize, but I honestly didn't.
Well,
I didn't
if I could,
see the costs in here that we could even make.
So you just mentioned there's not a lot of volatility, that a lot of the rates or the costs are indexed. Are there specific areas that you have concerns about that you think we should talk about?
Well, actually, I don't know if I'll ask the question I was going to ask. The question that I was going to ask Jay is, why did our share of the cost go down?
And I'll have to ask our SBWMA folks to kind of give us a quick synopsis of that.
I think it wasn't it that the
better management,
the people in San Carlos are choosing smaller bins? I think I saw that from the report.
That's actually causing the rates to go up.
So the adjustment process has two steps in it. The first step is to take Recology's total compensation and adjust it by the various indices, et cetera, and come up with their total compensation. So in total, their operating costs went up 1.2%. Then there's a reduction in interest, and there's a reduction in performance incentive and disincentive payments. So in total, their compensation is going to go up 0.2% next year. The second step is then we take that total cost and we allocate it to each agency based primarily on driver hours. So it's not a perfect system. That is going to cause fluctuations from year to year for many reasons. So the hours in San Carlos could, for instance, stay the same from last year to this year. But if other cities go up more, let's say Redwood City has more growth, more apartments, whatever, and there's more driver hours in other cities, San Carlos's share of the pie will go down, or did go down this year. In other years, it's gone up. It just will fluctuate. And the actual percent of Recology's costs to San Carlos this year, last year was 9%, and in 2015 it's going to be 8.77%, which is like, you would think insignificant, but that alone is $100,000 on the $54 million, whatever it is, of their total compensation. So that is just going to cause some fluctuations in the allocation.
So, Marshall, I didn't hear in there the answer to the question about why San Carlos's costs came down. I mean,
Sure you did.
Cameron had suggested that it was because of
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is that it's all relative, and that it's the driving cost is labor, and it's that number of hours, and so it's either that it's more efficient in San Carlos to pick up trash than it used to be, or more likely that it's less efficient somewhere else.
It's your relative total hours compared, how they change compared to how everyone else has changed. And the total hours just change slightly compared to the total. So you got a slightly lower share of the cost. I can go through each of the categories and figure out exactly where the hours changed if you'd like, but it's really a small percentage difference.
Okay.
I don't know if we ever did it, but I remember discussing here one night about even just informing our residents that, you know, if your waste paper can, you know, with cans and waste paper and so forth, the blue can, if it doesn't have much in it, don't put it out, because that means the trucks go through faster and they spend less time in San Carlos. And as Marshall just said, it might be incremental, but it does have an impact at some point. You know, now there's certain cans you can't do that with, like the yard waste, because if you have food waste in there, it's supposed to go out every week. But, you know, your blue can, arguably even your black can, you could not put it out if it doesn't have enough trash in it. And you're actually, if everybody did that, you're impacting the system, especially in May when you guys audit us, right? Yeah.
Right. I'm not, and it's fine, I'm not hearing any sort of questions, feedback, other than cutting Gino's and salary, which I'm
That was
giving due weight to.
That
I'm
was
giving due weight
facetious,
to, which is-
facetious, Gino. Facetious.
So there's not going to be any discussion about rate stabilization funds at the 25th meeting? You're not looking for input on that?
No, not at the 25th meeting, so. So I guess at this point,
Mr. Mayor?
yes.
The only thing that I would appreciate you asking at the meeting, and maybe it's not on the 25th, but I've talked about it before, is, you know, just viewing what goes on, and the point that I've made about some of the apartments that are around me in the downtown, and they put out, you know, 15 cans, and it just seems ridiculous that a truck has to stop and pick up 15 separate cans at an apartment complex, and why it isn't that the apartment has a bin. And you see, and that's the other thing I see, is some apartments down, you know, I live in the downtown, so I see what goes on. Some apartments have bins, and the trucks come by on a certain day and pick those up, and there's other days that the trucks come by to other apartment complexes and pick up 15 black cans, 15 blue cans. You know, you look at that and you go, this cannot be efficient, and it has to be affecting the rates.
It is an ongoing topic of discussion.
Okay.
So, and I think
Sorry to beat on it.
No, that's okay. This item, I don't think we have a motion or anything related to. So, staff, thank you for the information. I think it's actually good in terms of an initial early look-see at some of the things we'll be talking about in October.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, I thought just before we leave this item, maybe looking ahead to next year, maybe just touching base with the council and finding out if this discussion at this time is helpful for the council and beneficial, or, you know, does it seem confusing? You know, we're all kind of working through a new process here where elected officials are on this board, and so there's a different dynamic. And on the one hand, the SBWMA board is making some large level decisions that do sort of have an impact on us, but in no way does that impede the council's ability to ultimately set rates here in the next couple of months. And so maybe just some quick feedback on, you know, did this work, or how could we present it differently next year to maybe better meet the needs of the council?
If I may comment to that, I just think, and you know, Bob and I had this little mini discussion, if we're going to talk about cost and what's driving the rates vis-a-vis cost, I think, you know, having more information than we had, and probably having it sometime earlier before these guys set their budget and determine all these things, to allow us to have a look at, you know, behind the curtain. Not that we want to micromanage the darn thing, but, you know, look at what some of these things are and have some commentary on it. That's all.
Okay. Other comments?
No, I'm just glad we're having the discussion. Yes, I'm confused, but it'll help me not be confused later on. So,
honest politician.
Information is not useless.
My view on something like this is I would defer to Mark, and I think, you know, in this case, there's not a lot of information about what's driving the costs. So, I mean, if there's something that's going to ultimately directly affect residents that's actionable, absolutely. But on this, you know, I'm good to follow your lead, and we can focus on other things.
It occurs to me that actually we could sort of marry the 2 points that were being made at the opposite ends, and staff could provide we don't always have to provide information through a public presentation. We could provide a staff report to council members, and then if somebody had questions, we could agendize it.
Sure. Yeah.
They could ask for it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That might be a better way to do it. All right. That brings us to item 10D, consideration of adopting the elected official salary and benefit resolution.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Jeff Maltby, City Manager. The council at their last meeting had asked staff to agendize for their discussion and consideration a salary and benefit resolution for the City Council and the city's elected officials. We've done so. It was last updated by the council in 2009, and if memory serves, really the changes that were made in 2009 where there were benefit reductions and tiering that were put in place that mirrored some of the changes in compensation that was being made at the time for city employees, as we were in the midst of a pretty significant recession and budget cutting in the city. There are a whole litany of special laws that govern compensation for elected officials. We've tried to outline those for you in the staff report. Our city attorney, we worked closely with Greg, who can speak if you've got any questions to that regard. We've provided some examples of other like cities in terms of compensation and salaries and benefits as best we could, to the extent that we could find those responses, to provide that for you as well. With that, we've ultimately got for action for you tonight, should the council choose, a resolution which you could adopt, which would just be to continue the status quo. If you'd like to make changes to the status quo in either increasing or reducing benefits, we'll need to take those changes back and create a resolution for you that we would bring forward at an upcoming agenda. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, and we'll be eagerly taking notes on the direction provided by you this evening.
Questions?
The only question I had is just a clarification from the city attorney or from the city manager that whatever decisions we make, does it or does it not apply to the sitting members here?
Not until the next election.
And, you know,
the
because it was a little confusing on terms and elections and all that other thing.
So any decisions you make regarding council benefits would not apply to city employees?
Okay. No, I'm sorry, to the city council. I apologize.
To you all, would it apply tonight or?
Yeah, that's my question. Does it apply tonight? Does it ever apply at the next election? Does it not apply at all?
All applies at the next election.
Unless you take the option of just adopting the resolution that's attached with no change.
Right.
But if you change something, it's going to take effect, as far as the salary, it would take effect at the next election, or excuse me, after the next election, but some of the benefit items could take effect on approval of the resolution.
Okay.
Salary has a... I think that's the game. Oh, good point. Like, there's a clarifying comment. Some of the changes you can make are limited, but you cannot give yourself more benefits than one of the labor groups that have
sure.
MOUs with you.
But theoretically, we could tonight, eliminate a lot, a little, whatever we could do, or raise within the parameters that we have. But depending on whether it's salary or benefits, it could take effect tonight or it could take effect at the next election.
Well, just to clarify, the way we've, if you're going to make any changes from the 2009 resolution, we're going to bring that back.
Bring it back.
At a future meeting.
Right.
But in concept, at the future meeting, if you decide to make changes, any salary changes can't take effect until the next election.
Okay.
Benefit changes could take effect immediately, but there's limitations under the law that you cannot give yourselves a different benefit package.
But you could theoretically cut benefits.
Yeah, you could cut benefits.
And then that would eliminate certain things for the council.
That's right.
And even though we're sitting or not sitting, it doesn't make any difference.
That's right, on the benefits side.
Okay.
The health and welfare benefits side.
Okay.
Does that, if I can follow up on that, does that include, when you say benefits, things like some of the cities, for instance, have, a tech reimbursement, almost like a car allowance. They have a tech allowance, a phone allowance, those kinds of things. Are those benefits or what are those?
Those would be considered reimbursements as opposed to health and welfare benefits,
Yeah.
which are also allowed. Reimbursements are allowed, and allowances have been upheld.
And if we made a change to those either tonight or in the next couple of weeks or something, those take effect immediately, or you have to wait again till the next election?
The reimbursements could take effect immediately. Okay. It's the salary that's limited.
Salary is the one that has to wait, but all the other things would be
subject to limitations.
Yep. Other questions? I have one.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, let me ask. When you say reimbursements, are you talking about not related to benefits for other expenses?
I'll give you an example since not medical, health and welfare, but I'll give you an example. I was at the League of Cities conference last week. If the council decided they wanted to fund a reimbursement program for expenses related to a conference, that would be considered a reimbursement.
That's what I thought. Okay, thanks.
A couple of questions. So, can you quickly walk me through, and I'm sorry about my ignorance, I just don't participate in it, so I'm not familiar with the details. The health and welfare, the medical benefits that are available to council members, how does that work? My vague recollection is it's a benefit that we don't actually pay anything towards in order to get. Is that correct?
In terms of like medical premium?
Yes. Or how does it work? I mean,
well, I guess the best way to answer that question is it varies. It depends on the specific medical provider you go with, i.e. Blue Shield versus Kaiser. They have different premiums. And then there are tiers. You may be single, and not have a spouse or any dependents and be on the plan. And so there's one level, not only for that provider for that cost, but that the city provides for versus employee plus one versus
That's
employee
a fairly,
family.
okay, that's a fairly
So
traditional
it's
thing.
really all over the map.
What does, are the benefits and what we as individuals, council members, would actually pay, are there any differences between those and what's available to other employees?
For
What you just
medical
described,
benefits,
yeah.
for medical, vision, dental, there's no difference.
So if the particular set of choices would cost me X dollars, they would cost me X dollars if I was an employee of the city?
Yes, they would.
Okay. And the benefits that are provided or offered by the city, what's, if any, the relationship between full-time, part-time status?
Okay, there is a difference there. So you want to take a stab at?
So part-time employees have to reach a certain threshold of hours. It's a minimum of 20 hours per month to qualify for pension benefit. After you've worked that minimum hours for an extended period of time, I believe it's 6 months. And then for health care, we've tiered it back. And I apologize, I don't have the part-time benefit resolution in front of me, but there are significant hours, and it might be a little, we may have tiered it back even further. So there are certain limitations that they have to reach, or thresholds they have to reach.
Could you, I know you said you don't have the resolution with you, can you hazard a recollection about what it is? I mean, is it 20 hours a month again?
For health benefits, it's a minimum of 30, but I believe we did tier it back.
Yeah, and I don't know, can you look that up?
Yeah.
And maybe we can circle back around to it, because I know we can probably get to it pretty quick.
Okay.
Isn't that a bit of a difference, though, between a exempt and non-exempt? I mean, we're treated as the same as mid-management, I believe. And are they
management? Yeah, the management group.
Yeah, I mean, you know what the mayor's getting at is, I suppose the line of thinking might be council's part-time, right?
Right.
But you could say we are, but on the other hand, we're like management employees. We put in whatever time it takes to get the job done. So,
right, you're essentially. I mean, you're not like any employees, because you really are your own special group. But I understand what you're saying, and so without having been here, because this predate, this has been the sort of mirror of council benefits to the management benefit package has been in place for as long as I've been here, so at least 15 years. But I suspect that was probably the rationale to begin with.
and again, I'm sorry, if Greg, you were saying if something's changed to benefits, that also has to wait until the next election cycle.
No, on the benefit side, the same limitation doesn't apply that applies to salary. On the health and welfare benefits and reimbursement side, the council could, by resolution, make a change that takes effect immediately.
Okay.
Right. However, what the council can't do is have a health and welfare benefit that is greater than what you offer your employees.
Okay.
So in other words, if you want to have a better dental benefit, you would have to change all the dental benefits for the entire city, or a vision benefit, or a medical benefit, or whatnot. So that becomes the limitation, as opposed to an election.
And right now, we have the same.
Right now, you have the same as the management unit. There are very slight differences between the groups, but for all intents and purposes, they're pretty similar at this point.
Another thing that I think is different is AFSCME can pay for vision as an extra benefit to cover their family members. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
With an administrative fee.
Right.
So, does anybody want to make a motion?
To
Well, actually, I guess the only thing we have before us in terms of taking action would be I'm going to rephrase it as continue the status quo ante.
That's right.
Okay. Now, if nobody wants to make a motion because they want to see a change, then fine, but we'll have to discuss what, if anything, we want staff to bring back. I'm just initially trying to see if there's anybody who wants to make a motion.
I'd make a motion with a change. We haven't discussed anything, but...
Feel free.
So I would make the motion that we... trying to look for the resolution. Sorry, hold on.
Well, just for clarification, if there's any change, we're going to be coming back with it. So the only motion you can approve tonight would be to continue. But if you want to give staff direction to come back with a resolution at another meeting with a change, we can do that.
Thank you,
Let me back up if I may.
Low blood sugar, so I was wrong.
Mr. Mayor, one of the things I went in and I talked to Jeff about this thing, having brought it up, and one of the things that crossed my mind was rather than have us look at what we, get paid or compensated or whatever, that we impanel a temporary commission, perhaps of, some former council members, maybe a chamber member, whatever, to kind of look at it and look at what other cities do, look at what we're doing, what our history is, and make a recommendation to us on what, maybe what we ought to have going forward. Either things that are more immediate, like the benefits or reimbursement, and or the stipend, I call it. It's not really a salary, it's a stipend. But that's not, we would have to have an item brought back to us that would look in that direction if we wanted to go that direction. But that's something I was interested in doing because I feel a little uncomfortable, just blindly making some recommendations. If we had a panel that made some recommendations, then we could look at that and make changes to it if we so desired, but we could just look at what they did. Maybe we like it, maybe we don't, whatever. But it insulates it from being directly from us.
If other people want to support that, Matt, that's fine. It's certainly a way to go. Personally, I am fine with either maintaining. Actually, I'm not fine with maintaining the status quo ante. You correctly defined the concern I have with the questions I was asking staff, which is my sense is, could be proven wrong, but my sense is that the health and welfare benefits that we get are better than what I think are available to other part-time employees who also are serving the community. And I do classify us as part-time by nature. Right? I think that's the philosophy of local government in California. It's not really a full-time job. I'm not expected to be a full-time job. So if it were me, I would, there's nothing to act on tonight. My direction, what I want to see staff bring back is something that equilibrated us on some kind of rational basis with whatever it is that's being offered for a comparable part-time position in the city on the health and welfare side. But that's me. So, you've got your idea of a commission, basically, an ad hoc commission to study and make recommendations. Mine to make a restructuring change, have staff bring back a proposal with a restructuring change on that. What do the other three guys want to do?
So, Mark, I think you make a reasonable point. I was not aware that we get a better health care package than a comparable part-time employee. So I'd be willing to join you on that.
Okay. And actually, I suppose we could bring back both things, too. There's no rule that says we can't do that. But so we could ask staff to come back with that. Are there other thoughts that you guys have?
What are we, so we're not actually taking action on this item tonight, or?
Well, the only action, I think what Greg corrected me on, is the only action we could take tonight would be to readopt, basically, the existing system. So any change that we would make to compensation would have to come back with a different resolution at a different meeting.
That's correct.
At a future meeting.
So I'd like to speak to what you offered, Mr. Mayor, and that is this. One of the reasons I asked for this is I've watched what's gone on over the years as being on the council since 2001. And, I look at it a little differently maybe than you guys do because I work for myself. And so even like today, getting over here, I was telling Jeff, I got a phone call late in the day about a client wanting to change windows because it wasn't working with cabinetry. So I run over there. Then I'm trying to run over here, missing dinner entirely and everything. There's time, like when we have a council retreat, well, I look at my hourly rate that I charge, and I count the hours that I'm sitting there. I have to make that up. And that happens frequently, especially more and more. When I first got on council, usually meetings happened in the evening. Now, council meetings often happen at 6, 6:30, so it impinges on, your whole day when you're working. There's meetings like when I was on Library JPA or Airport Roundtable is in the evening, but ALUC happens during the day at 4:30. So more and more you get asked to go to things during the day. So again, for me, that bites out of my time that I could be earning my living. Also, when I first got on council, that wasn't too bad, because I had a wife who was making good money at UBS Payne Weber, and actually my health benefits came through that. So I just took the cash equivalent, which was, at that time, it was like $600. Mm-hmm. So all told, I was getting about $800 a month. You feel, it's not a full-time job, but you feel like you're being compensated for some of your loss in your business work. Now I get a check for $2.37. It's laughable. So it's almost an insult, in a way, to get a check for $2.37. And the reason is because now the only real benefit I have to being on council, when I look at it as a business person, is I get my health benefits for my family and myself. But the city pays, I think this last year, about $1,300 on the family plan. Takes all of my stipend to make up the difference. That's why I get a check for $2.37. Then the other part of it is, and one of the things I was looking at here that might, be worthwhile changing is, we pay management, some of the management positions, a car allowance up to $500 a month. That's more than our stipend. For us, when we go to a meeting or drive anywhere, I can't tell you how many times I've forgotten. I just forget to put in the reimbursement. And so it just goes by the wayside. Council getting I looked at comparing what other cities get, maybe a small car allowance. I use my cell phone all the time on council matters, people calling me for council things and so forth. I don't get reimbursed for that. So I think some of those kinds of things might be within reason. I'm not looking to make money here, but I am looking to feel okay for the time, again, that I lose as a business person, and the hours I put into this versus what I could be putting into my business, not to mention my family and so forth. So that's how I look at it. I'm not looking to dig a gold mine, but
I can appreciate that. I don't think anybody, certainly not me, I wasn't implying otherwise. I think a lot of it, it's interesting that a lot of it comes back to probably what one is used to and expectations. And the first decade that I spent as an elected official, school board trustees don't get paid anything in San Carlos. Some places they do, they don't in San Carlos. And it wasn't until, I think it was one of the last actions that I voted on, we made access to the benefit plan, the health and welfare benefit plan, available finally to the trustees, but you had to pay the full premium. In other words, the district didn't kick in anything. I don't know what it is today. I suspect it's still the same. that same system. And again, it does vary by district. I mean, the high school district does provide something more comparable to what the city does here on the health and welfare side. But you know, that's where I'm coming from. I appreciate where you're coming from. Cameron said he's willing to have staff come back and show us what this other thing would look like, you know, following on my suggestion. What do you guys think?
Well, let me say, I'm in the same boat as Matt. I'm self-employed. I spend a lot of hours on council business, and every hour I take away is time I'm not spending at my job. Although, Matt, I feel kind of rich in comparison because my net check's 30 times yours. It's a whopping $60 a month. So, I guess at the very least, I'm pretty much, I'm okay with leaving the package, or whatever you want to call it, the way it is, because obviously I didn't get into this position to make any money. But I do sympathize with Matt. I think that, you know, we all put a lot of time in. If what I would like to see, though, Matt, is, you know, what do you have in mind? I mean, we're looking at either we adopt the what we have and pretty much leave it alone, or do something else. I mean, if you have another idea, I'd certainly be interested in hearing it. I might like it. But I agree, you and I are in the same boat. Everybody else here is not. So, and possibly to make it attractive in the future for other self-employed people to run for council, we certainly don't want to have something that they're going to look at and say, you know, I really don't think that I can afford that. And whoever that person is, that might be someone who could contribute to the council in a very positive way and be a good person to have on. And I wouldn't want to discourage them in the future. So I think, you know, if you've got some ideas for some nominal changes that are things that we can act on, I'd certainly be open to hearing them.
Well, if you're open to hearing changes, then we should probably have this study session that these two gentlemen provided, because then it gives Mr. Grocott a chance to propose ideas, or you propose, or any of us to propose ideas. You know, when I started this in 2005, and a little, you know, after you, I didn't even know we got paid. I honestly didn't. You know, and somebody said, you're going to get a check, and I said, for what? You know, I mean, I didn't know that, so I didn't have any concept of now, granted, I was not working at that time, but I could have been. And if I was, and it was only a year response, I still would have said, it wouldn't have impacted my decision to run for council, is I guess what I'm getting at. And I'd be interested to hear what Rebecca has to say about part-time things, and maybe we cut it, maybe we raise it, maybe, I don't know. There's a myriad of things we could do. So, I mean, let's have a study session, because then we can, at a reasonable hour, talk about, you know, as opposed to 10:30 at night, talk about the different changes that people want to make and see if there's a consensus. So I agree with you guys. Let's have let's do it at a reasonable hour and study it.
I think that's a good idea.
And then we pass on adopting this motion tonight and see what we come up to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we do nothing tonight, it continues.
Yeah, it continues on. Right.
So. All right. So we will agendize that for a future council meeting.
Okay.
All right. And with that, we are adjourned.